After 6 grueling years of painful fertility treatments and empty promises, my hedge fund manager husband walked into our bathroom, snatched the syringe from my hand, and threw divorce papers into the sink. "Stop stabbing yourself," he sneered. "You are barren, and my intern is already 12 weeks pregnant." He thought kicking me out into the freezing snow with absolutely nothing would destroy me. He had no idea the lonely former sheriff living next door to my temporary shack was actually a billionaire medical heir, or that 6 months later I would be pregnant with twins standing beside the one man who could dismantle my ex-husband's entire empire. My name is Brianna, 33 years old, and a digital marketing specialist who spent nearly a decade believing I was the reason my marriage was failing. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your heart shattered by the person who promised to protect it. The cold marble floor of our master bathroom sent a chill up my bare legs, but it was nothing compared to the sharp pinch of the needle. I stood in front of the vanity mirror, gripping a fold of skin on my stomach. It was my 104th hormone injection. 104 times I had bruised my own body, enduring the intense nausea, the crippling mood swings, and the crushing disappointment that followed every single negative pregnancy test. The physical toll was exhausting, but the mental burden was far heavier. Trent, my husband of 7 years, was supposed to be right beside me. He was supposed to hold my hand, tell me I was brave, and whisper that this time the embryo transfer would finally work. Instead, the heavy oak door flew open with such violent force that it slammed against the wall, rattling the framed wedding photo hanging nearby. Trent stood in the doorway. At 35, he was a senior partner at a top-tier hedge fund in Chicago, always immaculately dressed in tailored suits, projecting an image of absolute corporate perfection. But looking at him now, his jaw clenched, and his eyes devoid of any warmth, I saw the ruthless businessman he usually reserved for his market rivals. He did not ask if I was in pain. He did not offer any comfort. He simply marched over and tossed a thick manila folder directly into the wet sink. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling as I carefully capped the syringe and set it down on the counter. "Divorce papers," he said flatly. "Sign them by tomorrow." The words did not process immediately. I stared at the folder, watching the water from the faucet slowly soak into the thick paper, ruining the edges. "Trent, what are you talking about?" I managed to say, my breath catching in my throat. "We have the transfer scheduled for next week. The clinic said my hormone levels are finally looking good. We are so close." "Stop stabbing yourself, Brianna," he sneered, crossing his arms over his chest. "It is pathetic. You are barren. The clinic is just taking our money, and I am completely done pretending that your broken body is ever going to give me a child." His words sliced through me like a physical blade. For 6 years, I had blamed myself. I had absorbed the passive-aggressive comments from his mother, Barbara, who always made sure to remind me at Thanksgiving dinners that Trent needed an heir for his legacy. I had pushed through the grueling schedule of my remote marketing job while managing endless doctor appointments, all while Trent traveled for client meetings and expensive golf tournaments, claiming he was building our future. I endured the invasive procedures and the judgment because I believed we were a team fighting a shared battle. "I am not giving up." I choked out tears, finally spilling over my cheeks and dripping onto my robe. "We promised each other through sickness and health." "You promised me. I am not giving up either," Trent replied, adjusting his expensive watch with terrifying calm. "I am just giving up on you. Lexi is 12 weeks pregnant. We just heard the heartbeat this morning." Lexi. The name dropped into the room like a bomb. She was the 23-year-old intern he had hired 6 months ago. The girl who was barely out of college, who giggled at all of his unfunny jokes at the company Christmas party. The girl I had actually felt sorry for because she seemed so young and overwhelmed by the aggressive corporate world Trent operated in. My knees buckled slightly, and I grabbed the edge of the vanity to keep from collapsing to the floor. "You slept with your intern?" I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. While I was pumping my body full of drugs and crying myself to sleep over our failed cycles, You were sleeping with a college girl. She is not just my intern anymore, Trent said, taking a step backward out of the bathroom. She is the mother of my child, a real woman who can actually give me what I want. Now get dressed. You have exactly 2 hours to pack your things and get out of my house. Your house. I cried out, anger finally piercing through the shock. We bought this house together. I helped pay the mortgage for the first 3 years before you made partner. My parents' trust bought this house. He corrected me with a cruel, satisfied smile. Read the papers in the sink, Brianna. You signed a post-nuptial agreement 3 years ago when my firm went public. You have absolutely no claim to this property or my current assets. He turned his back on me and walked down the hallway without a single backward glance. My chest heaved as I gasped for air, a full-blown panic attack taking over my body. The elegant bathroom walls felt like they were closing in on me. I stumbled out of the bathroom, clutching my robe tightly around my waist, desperate to make sense of the nightmare unfolding around me. I staggered down the sweeping staircase, intending to demand that Trent call his lawyer and explain this sudden, terrifying madness. But as I reached the bottom step and looked into our formal living room, the breath was knocked out of me entirely. Lexi was there. She was not crying. She was not apologizing for destroying my marriage. She was standing next to the coffee table, humming a cheerful pop song, and with a casual, practiced motion, she was sweeping my expensive designer jewelry, my anniversary gifts, my grandmother's pearl necklace, and my diamond tennis bracelet directly into her oversized leather designer purse. When she heard my bare feet on the hardwood floor, she did not flinch or look guilty. She simply looked up, zipped her purse shut with a loud click, and gave me a slow, triumphant smirk. I stared at the heavy leather purse slung over her shoulder, the exact designer bag I had saved up for months to buy myself as a promotion gift 2 years ago. The sheer audacity of her standing in my living room, stealing my hard-earned belongings while carrying the child I had bled and suffered to conceive, left me entirely paralyzed. Lexi brushed a strand of perfectly highlighted blonde hair behind her ear and let out a soft, condescending laugh. "Do not look so shocked, Brianna," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Trent told me you never wear any of this stuff anyway. You are always too busy working in your ugly sweatpants. I figured these pieces deserve to be worn by someone who actually goes out and lives in the real world." Before I could form the words to demand my grandmother's vintage pearl necklace back from her greedy hands, Trent strode into the room carrying a stack of flattened cardboard moving boxes. He dropped them onto the expensive Persian rug with a dull, heavy thud. "You have 1 hour and 45 minutes left," he announced, tapping the face of his silver Rolex. "I suggest you stop glaring at Lexi and start packing your things. The security system codes are being electronically changed at noon. If you are not out of this house by then, I will have the neighborhood private patrol physically escort you off the premises." My chest tightened so painfully I thought my ribs might actually splinter. "Trent, you cannot do this to me," I pleaded, my voice breaking as the reality of the situation crashed over me. "It is freezing outside. A massive blizzard is supposed to hit the city this afternoon. Where am I supposed to go?" "That is no longer my problem," he replied without a shred of human empathy. "You should have thought about building a financial backup plan instead of obsessing over getting pregnant and wasting my money on useless medical procedures. Now go pack. Do not make me call security early." I stumbled up the sweeping mahogany staircase, my vision blurred with hot, stinging tears. The physical pain of the morning's hormone injection suddenly throbbed in my lower abdomen, a cruel and agonizing reminder of the child I was trying to give him while he was busy creating one with an intern. I dragged 2 large suitcases from the back of the walk-in closet and began throwing my clothes into them indiscriminately. Sweaters, jeans, whatever my hands could grab. I was shaking so badly I could barely manage the metal zippers. Lexi appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, leaning casually against the doorframe while sipping coffee from my favorite ceramic mug. She watched me scramble in a state of sheer panic, her eyes scanning the items I was frantically tossing into my bags. "Are you really taking those?" she asked, gesturing toward a pile of my conservative work blouses. "They are so old, lady. No wonder Trent lost interest in you. You dress like a boring librarian from the 90s. I am honestly doing you a massive favor by moving in today." This house needs some actual style, and Trent needs a vibrant woman who does not treat intimacy like a depressing medical chore. I stopped packing and glared at her, my hands balling into tight fists until my nails bit into my palms. "Get out of my room," I demanded, my voice dropping to a dangerously low register. Lexi rolled her eyes but took a step back into the hallway. "It is my room now," she shot back confidently. "Do not forget to take your depressing medical charts with you. I do not want those negative barren vibes anywhere near my baby." I shoved the last of my basic necessities into the second suitcase, zipping it shut with a violent tug. I grabbed my purse, my laptop bag, and my car keys. I refused to look back at the elegant bedroom that had been my sanctuary for 7 years. I dragged the heavy suitcases down the stairs, each thump echoing like a final mocking drumbeat on my marriage. Trent and Lexi were sitting close together on the living room sofa, scrolling through a tablet, already planning their new life. Neither of them even bothered to look up as I struggled with the heavy front door and pushed my way out into the biting winter cold. The Chicago wind hit me like a physical blow. The snow had already begun to fall heavily, coating the long driveway in a thick, slippery layer of white. I dragged my luggage to my SUV, fighting against the brutal gusts that whipped my hair across my face and stung my tear-stained cheeks. My hands were completely numb by the time I managed to hoist the heavy bags into the trunk. I climbed into the driver's seat, my entire body violently shaking from both the freezing temperature and the massive adrenaline crash. I started the engine and turned the heater on full blast. As I pulled out of the gated community, the terrifying reality of my situation crushed the breath out of me. I was 33 years old, newly homeless, and driving into a massive blizzard with nowhere to go. My parents lived in Florida, and most of my friends were tied to Trent through his high society corporate circles. If I called them, word would get back to Trent immediately. I was entirely, profoundly alone. Suddenly, a sharp, stabbing cramp ripped through my lower abdomen. The intense dosage of IVF hormones was wreaking havoc on my system, and the severe emotional stress was only making the pelvic pain exponentially worse. I doubled over the steering wheel, gasping for air, as another wave of fiery agony hit me. I needed painkillers immediately before I ended up passing out behind the wheel and crashing my car. I spotted a brightly lit gas station through the blinding curtain of snow and carefully navigated my SUV into the empty parking lot. The wind howled menacingly as I pushed my way out of the car and sprinted through the icy slush toward the convenience store doors. Inside, the harsh fluorescent lights made my headache pound harder. I hurried down the narrow aisles, grabbing a large bottle of maximum-strength ibuprofen and a bottle of water. I approached the counter, shivering violently in my thin wool coat. The cashier, an older woman with a tired, sympathetic expression, scanned the items. "That will be $12.50, she said. I reached into my purse and pulled out my primary credit card, a premium joint account card Trent and I shared. I handed it to her, desperate to get back to the warmth of my car and swallow the pills to stop the blinding pain. She swiped the card through the terminal. The machine beeped an angry, discordant tone. "Declined," she stated, looking at the small digital screen. "That is impossible," I said, my heart rate spiking rapidly. "Please try it again. The chip can be temperamental in the cold." She inserted the chip. The machine beeped again. "Still declined, honey. Do you have another card?" Panic began to claw at my throat, suffocating me. I dug frantically into my wallet and pulled out my personal debit card tied to the checking account where my digital marketing salary was directly deposited every 2 weeks. I handed it over with a trembling hand. The cashier swiped it. Beep, declined. My blood ran ice cold, colder than the blizzard outside. No, 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 there has to be a mistake with your machine. I have money in that account. I just got paid yesterday. I pulled out my phone and quickly logged into my mobile banking app. My fingers were shaking so badly I could barely type my password. The screen loaded and my breath stopped completely. Checking account balance $0. Savings account balance $0. Joint credit card status, account closed. I scrolled down to the transaction history, my eyes widening in pure horror. Exactly 1 hour ago, while I was upstairs crying and packing my suitcases, Trent had executed a series of massive wire transfers. He had completely drained every single account that had my name on it, transferring the funds into an offshore holding account I could not access. He had even taken my direct deposit, stripping away the money I had earned through my own hard work. "I am sorry, miss," the cashier said, her voice softening with pity as she watched the devastation wash over my pale face. "The terminal says the accounts are frozen. If you cannot pay, I have to put these back." I stared at the bottle of painkillers on the counter, the physical agony in my abdomen flaring up again as if mocking my utter helplessness. I looked out the glass doors at the brutal snowstorm raging outside, the wind violently shaking the gas station signs. I had no money, no home, no husband, and no way to even buy a simple bottle of water to swallow a pill. Trent had not just evicted me. He had financially erased me. I stood frozen in the harsh fluorescent light, utterly penniless and completely broken in the middle of the unforgiving snow. After 6 grueling years of painful fertility treatments and empty promises, my hedge fund manager husband walked into our bathroom, snatched the syringe from my hand, and threw divorce papers into the sink. "Stop stabbing yourself," he sneered. "You are barren, and my intern is already 12 weeks pregnant." He thought kicking me out into the freezing snow with absolutely nothing would destroy me. He had no idea the lonely former sheriff living next door to my temporary shack was actually a billionaire medical heir, or that 6 months later, I would be pregnant with twins, standing beside the one man who could dismantle my ex-husband's entire empire. My name is Brianna, 33 years old, and a digital marketing specialist who spent nearly a decade believing I was the reason my marriage was failing. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your heart shattered by the person who promised to protect it. The cold marble floor of our master bathroom sent a chill up my bare legs, but it was nothing compared to the sharp pinch of the needle. I stood in front of the vanity mirror, gripping a fold of skin on my stomach. It was my 104th hormone injection. 104 times I had bruised my own body, enduring the intense nausea, the crippling mood swings, and the crushing disappointment that followed every single negative pregnancy test. The physical toll was exhausting, but the mental burden was far heavier. Trent, my husband of 7 years, was supposed to be right beside me. He was supposed to hold my hand, tell me I was brave, and whisper that this time the embryo transfer would finally work. Instead, the heavy oak door flew open with such violent force that it slammed against the wall, rattling the framed wedding photo hanging nearby. Trent stood in the doorway. At 35, he was a senior partner at a top-tier hedge fund in Chicago, always immaculately dressed in tailored suits, projecting an image of absolute corporate perfection. But looking at him now, his jaw clenched and his eyes devoid of any warmth, I saw the ruthless businessman he usually reserved for his market rivals. He did not ask if I was in pain. He did not offer any comfort. He simply marched over and tossed a thick manila folder directly into the wet sink. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling, as I carefully capped the syringe and set it down on the counter. "Divorce papers," he said flatly. "Sign them by tomorrow." The words did not process immediately. I stared at the folder, watching the water from the faucet slowly soak into the thick paper, ruining the edges. "Trent, what are you talking about?" I managed to say, my breath catching in my throat. "We have the transfer scheduled for next week. The clinic said my hormone levels are finally looking good. We are so close." "Stop stabbing yourself, Brianna," he sneered, crossing his arms over his chest. "It is pathetic. You are barren. The clinic is just taking our money, and I am completely done pretending that your broken body is ever going to give me a child." His words sliced through me like a physical blade. For 6 years, I had blamed myself. I had absorbed the passive-aggressive comments from his mother, Barbara, who always made sure to remind me at Thanksgiving dinners that Trent needed an heir for his legacy. I had pushed through the grueling schedule of my remote marketing job while managing endless doctor appointments, all while Trent traveled for client meetings and expensive golf tournaments, claiming he was building our future. I endured the invasive procedures and the judgment because I believed we were a team fighting a shared battle. I am not giving up. I choked out tears finally spilling over my cheeks and dripping onto my robe. We promised each other through sickness and health. You promised me. I am not giving up either, Trent replied, adjusting his expensive watch with terrifying calm. I am just giving up on you. Lexi is 12 weeks pregnant. We just heard the heartbeat this morning. Lexi. The name dropped into the room like a bomb. She was the 23-year-old intern he had hired 6 months ago, the girl who was barely out of college who giggled at all of his unfunny jokes at the company Christmas party. The girl I had actually felt sorry for because she seemed so young and overwhelmed by the aggressive corporate world Trent operated in. My knees buckled slightly and I grabbed the edge of the vanity to keep from collapsing to the floor. You slept with your intern? I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. While I was pumping my body full of drugs and crying myself to sleep over our failed cycles, you were sleeping with a college girl. She is not just my intern anymore, Trent said, taking a step backward out of the bathroom. She is the mother of my child, a real woman who can actually give me what I want. Now get dressed. You have exactly 2 hours to pack your things and get out of my house. Your house. I cried out, anger finally piercing through the shock. We bought this house together. I helped pay the mortgage for the first 3 years before you made partner. My parents' trust bought this house, he corrected me with a cruel, satisfied smile. Read the papers in the sink, Brianna. You signed a postnuptial agreement 3 years ago when my firm went public. You have absolutely no claim to this property or my current assets. He turned his back on me and walked down the hallway without a single backward glance. My chest heaved as I gasped for air, a full-blown panic attack taking over my body. The elegant bathroom walls felt like they were closing in on me. I stumbled out of the bathroom, clutching my robe tightly around my waist, desperate to make sense of the nightmare unfolding around me. I staggered down the sweeping staircase, intending to demand that Trent call his lawyer and explain this sudden, terrifying madness. But as I reached the bottom step and looked into our formal living room, the breath was knocked out of me entirely. Lexi was there. She was not crying. She was not apologizing for destroying my marriage. She was standing next to the coffee table, humming a cheerful pop song. And with a casual, practiced motion, she was sweeping my expensive designer jewelry, my anniversary gifts, my grandmother's pearl necklace, and my diamond tennis bracelet directly into her oversized leather designer purse. When she heard my bare feet on the hardwood floor, she did not flinch or look guilty. She simply looked up, zipped her purse shut with a loud click, and gave me a slow, triumphant smirk. I stared at the heavy leather purse slung over her shoulder, the exact designer bag I had saved up for months to buy myself as a promotion gift 2 years ago. The sheer audacity of her standing in my living room stealing my hard-earned belongings while carrying the child I had bled and suffered to conceive left me entirely paralyzed. Lexi brushed a strand of perfectly highlighted blonde hair behind her ear and let out a soft, condescending laugh. "Do not look so shocked, Brianna," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Trent told me you never wear any of this stuff anyway. You are always too busy working in your ugly sweatpants. I figured these pieces deserved to be worn by someone who actually goes out and lives in the real world." Before I could form the words to demand my grandmother's vintage pearl necklace back from her greedy hands, Trent strode into the room carrying a stack of flattened cardboard moving boxes. He dropped them onto the expensive Persian rug with a dull, heavy thud. "You have 1 hour and 45 minutes left," he announced, tapping the face of his silver Rolex. "I suggest you stop glaring at Lexi and start packing your things. The security system codes are being electronically changed at noon. If you are not out of this house by then, I will have the neighborhood private patrol physically escort you off the premises." My chest tightened so painfully I thought my ribs might actually splinter. "Trent, you cannot do this to me," I pleaded, my voice breaking as the reality of the situation crashed over me. "It is freezing outside. A massive blizzard is supposed to hit the city this afternoon. Where am I supposed to go?" "That is no longer my problem," he replied without a shred of human empathy. "You should have thought about building a financial backup plan, instead of obsessing over getting pregnant and wasting my money on useless medical procedures." Now go pack. Do not make me call security early. I stumbled up the sweeping mahogany staircase, my vision blurred with hot, stinging tears. The physical pain of the morning's hormone injection suddenly throbbed in my lower abdomen, a cruel and agonizing reminder of the child I was trying to give him while he was busy creating one with an intern. I dragged two large suitcases from the back of the walk-in closet and began throwing my clothes into them indiscriminately. Sweaters, jeans, whatever my hands could grab. I was shaking so badly I could barely manage the metal zippers. Lexi appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, leaning casually against the doorframe while sipping coffee from my favorite ceramic mug. She watched me scramble in a state of sheer panic, her eyes scanning the items I was frantically tossing into my bags. "Are you really taking those?" she asked, gesturing toward a pile of my conservative work blouses. "They are so old lady. No wonder Trent lost interest in you. You dress like a boring librarian from the 90s. I am honestly doing you a massive favor by moving in today. This house needs some actual style, and Trent needs a vibrant woman who does not treat intimacy like a depressing medical chore." I stopped packing and glared at her, my hands balling into tight fists until my nails bit into my palms. "Get out of my room!" I demanded, my voice dropping to a dangerously low register. Lexi rolled her eyes but took a step back into the hallway. "It is my room now," she shot back confidently. "Do not forget to take your depressing medical charts with you. I do not want those negative, barren vibes anywhere near my baby." I shoved the last of my basic necessities into the second suitcase, zipping it shut with a violent tug. I grabbed my purse, my laptop bag, and my car keys. I refused to look back at the elegant bedroom that had been my sanctuary for 7 years. I dragged the heavy suitcases down the stairs, each thump echoing like a final mocking drumbeat on my marriage. Trent and Lexi were sitting close together on the living room sofa, scrolling through a tablet, already planning their new life. Neither of them even bothered to look up as I struggled with the heavy front door and pushed my way out into the biting winter cold. The Chicago wind hit me like a physical blow. The snow had already begun to fall heavily, coating the long driveway in a thick, slippery layer of white. I dragged my luggage to my SUV, fighting against the brutal gusts that whipped my hair across my face and stung my tear-stained cheeks. My hands were completely numb by the time I managed to hoist the heavy bags into the trunk. I climbed into the driver's seat, my entire body violently shaking from both the freezing temperature and the massive adrenaline crash. I started the engine and turned the heater on full blast. As I pulled out of the gated community, the terrifying reality of my situation crushed the breath out of me. I was 33 years old, newly homeless, and driving into a massive blizzard with nowhere to go. My parents lived in Florida, and most of my friends were tied to Trent through his high society corporate circles. If I called them, word would get back to Trent immediately. I was entirely, profoundly alone. Suddenly, a sharp stabbing cramp ripped through my lower abdomen. The intense dosage of IVF hormones was wreaking havoc on my system, and the severe emotional stress was only making the pelvic pain exponentially worse. I doubled over the steering wheel, gasping for air, as another wave of fiery agony hit me. I needed painkillers immediately before I ended up passing out behind the wheel and crashing my car. I spotted a brightly lit gas station through the blinding curtain of snow and carefully navigated my SUV into the empty parking lot. The wind howled menacingly as I pushed my way out of the car and sprinted through the icy slush toward the convenience store doors. Inside, the harsh fluorescent lights made my headache pound harder. I hurried down the narrow aisles, grabbing a large bottle of maximum-strength ibuprofen and a bottle of water. I approached the counter, shivering violently in my thin wool coat. The cashier, an older woman with a tired, sympathetic expression, scanned the items. "That will be $12.50, she said. I reached into my purse and pulled out my primary credit card, a premium joint account card Trent and I shared. I handed it to her, desperate to get back to the warmth of my car and swallow the pills to stop the blinding pain. She swiped the card through the terminal. The machine beeped an angry, discordant tone. "Declined," she stated, looking at the small digital screen. "That is impossible," I said, my heart rate spiking rapidly. "Please try it again. The chip can be temperamental in the cold. She inserted the chip. The machine beeped again. Still declined, honey. Do you have another card? Panic began to claw at my throat, suffocating me. I dug frantically into my wallet and pulled out my personal debit card tied to the checking account where my digital marketing salary was directly deposited every 2 weeks. I handed it over with a trembling hand. The cashier swiped it. Beep, declined. My blood ran ice cold, colder than the blizzard outside. No, 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 there has to be a mistake with your machine. I have money in that account. I just got paid yesterday. I pulled out my phone and quickly logged into my mobile banking app. My fingers were shaking so badly I could barely type my password. The screen loaded and my breath stopped completely. Checking account balance $0. Savings account balance $0. Joint credit card status, account closed. I scrolled down to the transaction history, my eyes widening in pure horror. Exactly 1 hour ago, while I was upstairs crying and packing my suitcases, Trent had executed a series of massive wire transfers. He had completely drained every single account that had my name on it, transferring the funds into an offshore holding account I could not access. He had even taken my direct deposit, stripping away the money I had earned through my own hard work. I am sorry, miss, the cashier said, her voice softening with pity as she watched the devastation wash over my pale face. The terminal says the accounts are frozen. If you cannot pay, I have to put these back. I stood frozen in the harsh fluorescent light, utterly penniless, and completely broken in the middle of the unforgiving snow. The cashier stared at me, waiting for me to put the painkillers back. My hands shook violently as a sudden sharp memory pierced through the panic. 2 years ago, after a minor argument with Trent about my financial independence, I had slipped a folded $500 bill into a hidden zippered compartment of my laptop bag for absolute emergencies. I had forgotten about it until this exact second. Hold on, I told the cashier, my voice cracking. I ripped open my laptop bag, my numb fingers fumbling with the tiny hidden zipper. There, pressed flat against the fabric, was the crisp $100 bill. I slapped it onto the counter. Keep the change, I gasped, grabbing the bottle of ibuprofen and tearing off the safety seal. I dry swallowed 3 pills right there in the aisle, desperate for the searing pain in my abdomen to stop. I ran back to my SUV and locked the doors, shivering uncontrollably as the heat blasted from the vents. I had cash, but $500 would not last long in Chicago. I needed a place to hide, a place where Trent and his high society lawyers could not easily find me while I figured out my next move. I drove straight toward the edge of town, steering clear of the upscale neighborhoods and luxury hotels we used to frequent. The blizzard was worsening, turning the roads into dangerous sheets of ice. An hour later, I pulled into the dirt driveway of a rundown cash-only motor lodge that consisted of isolated, dilapidated cabins. The neon sign out front buzzed and flickered, shedding a sickly red light over the snow. I paid a grumpy manager for a week up front, handing over most of my emergency stash. Cabin number 4 was a freezing, damp nightmare. The floorboards creaked under my boots and the air smelled heavily of mildew and cheap pine cleaner. The ancient radiator in the corner clanked loudly, but emitted almost no heat. I dragged my 2 heavy suitcases inside and locked the flimsy door behind me. I did not even take off my wool coat. I just sank onto the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at the peeling wallpaper. I had gone from a multi-million-dollar mansion to a freezing shack in a matter of hours. Before I could even unzip my first suitcase to find an extra sweater, the crunch of heavy tires on the gravel outside caught my attention. Bright, aggressive headlights pierced through the thin, dusty curtains of my cabin window. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had Trent tracked the GPS in my car? I cautiously pulled back the edge of the curtain. It was not Trent. A sleek black Range Rover had parked directly behind my SUV, blocking it in. 2 women stepped out into the howling wind, pulling their expensive fur coats tightly around themselves. It was my mother-in-law, Barbara, and my sister-in-law, Kendra. Barbara was 60 years old, but possessed the icy, preserved beauty of a woman who spent half her life at dermatologists and country clubs. Kendra, at 30, was essentially a miniature, equally vicious version of her mother. They did not look worried. They looked purposeful. I opened the cabin door just as Barbara marched up the rotting wooden steps, her designer boots clicking sharply against the ice. "Barbara," I asked, confusion momentarily overriding my anger. "How did you know I was here?" "Trent tracks the vehicle, mileage and location through his corporate account." "Brianna," Barbara said, her voice dripping with absolute disdain as she looked me up and down. "We did not come to check on your well-being, so wipe that pathetic, hopeful look off your face. Hand over the keys." I stared at her, the freezing wind whipping my hair across my face. "What are you talking about?" "Talking." The SUV Kendra chimed in, stepping up beside her mother with a smug, satisfied grin. "Trent put the down payment on it through his hedge fund. Legally, it belongs to his company. He sent us to retrieve it before you try to sell it, or completely trash it. Hand over the keys, Brianna." "You cannot be serious!" I protested, my voice trembling with a mix of cold and raw fury. "He just threw me out into a blizzard. He froze all my bank accounts. That car is the only thing keeping me from freezing to death on the streets, and you want to take it away." Barbara stepped closer, her perfectly manicured finger pointing directly at my chest. "Do not you dare play the victim here. I told Trent 7 years ago that marrying you was a mistake. You brought absolutely nothing to this family. For 6 years we watched my son waste his hard-earned wealth on your endless, useless medical treatments. You are a toxic weed, Brianna. You attached yourself to my son and choked the life out of his future, holding him back from real fatherhood." The cruelty of her words took my breath away. "You know how hard I tried," I whispered, tears freezing on my cheeks. "You know the physical hell I put my body through for him. And it was all for nothing." Barbara spat back, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Lexi is giving this family a true heir. She is young, she is healthy, and she is actually capable of providing what Trent deserves. You are just a broken, barren woman who refused to accept reality. Now give me the keys before I call the police and report the vehicle stolen." Kendra laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "Come on, Brianna, just give up. You lost. Lexi is already redecorating the nursery. You do not belong in our world anymore. Go back to whatever lower-class life you crawled out of." The fight drained out of me. The physical pain from the hormone crash, the freezing temperature, and the sheer emotional devastation left me entirely hollow. My hands were completely numb as I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the heavy set of car keys, and dropped them into Barbara's waiting gloved palm. "Smart girl," Barbara sneered. "Do not ever contact my son again." They turned their backs on me, their expensive boots navigating the icy steps with practiced grace. They climbed into my SUV, and the Range Rover, the engines roaring to life in the quiet, frozen night. I stood in the doorway of the freezing cabin, watching the bright red taillights of my only lifeline fade into the relentless, swirling blizzard. The exhaust fumes lingered in the air for a brief second before the wind snatched away. I tried to take a step back into the cabin, but my legs finally gave out. The betrayal was too heavy to carry. My vision tunneled, the edges turning dark, as the freezing cold seeped directly into my bones. I collapsed hard onto the frozen wooden planks of the porch, the rough ice scraping my cheek as I fell entirely at the mercy of the brutal winter storm. My cheek rested against the rough, freezing wood of the cabin porch. The bitter ice bit into my skin, but I was too weak to push myself up. My body was shutting down, the adrenaline finally giving way to the crushing reality of the physical and emotional trauma I had endured over the last few hours. I lay there in the swirling snow, listening to the idling engines of my stolen SUV and the Range Rover, waiting for the sound of tires crunching on gravel to signal that Barbara and Kendra had finally left me to die in the cold. But the engines did not fade. Instead, I heard the distinct sound of a car door opening and closing, followed by footsteps. These were not the sharp, arrogant clicks of Barbara's designer heels. These footsteps were heavy, urgent, and moving directly toward my shivering body. I forced my eyes open, my eyelashes heavy with frozen tears. Through the blinding curtain of snow, a tall figure loomed over me. It was Dion. At 34, Dion was a brilliant architect, a man of quiet dignity, and unfortunately Kendra's husband. Since the day he married into Trent's family, Dion had always been the silent observer at their lavish, toxic family dinners. He was an African American man who had built his own successful firm from the ground up, standing in stark contrast to Trent's inherited privilege. He had always treated me with a quiet, respectful kindness, often exchanging knowing glances with me across the dining table whenever Barbara launched into one of her elitist tirades. Dion dropped to one knee beside me, his broad shoulders blocking the worst of the biting wind. He glanced nervously over his shoulder toward the idling vehicles. Through the thick snowfall, I could vaguely see Barbara and Kendra inside the warm cabin of the Range Rover, completely distracted as they argued over the navigation system. Dion pulled off his thick leather glove. His warm, steady hand grabbed my freezing, trembling fingers. Before I could even attempt to speak, he shoved a thick, heavy envelope deep into the pocket of my wool coat. "I am so sorry," Brianna, Dion whispered, his deep voice thick with absolute disgust. "They forced me to come along to drive the SUV back to the city. Kendra told me they were just picking up some paperwork. If I had known they were leaving you out here in a blizzard, I would have stopped them. I swear to you, I would have stopped them." My lips were blue and trembling so violently that I could not form a single word. I just stared up at him, my vision blurring. "Listen to me very carefully." Dayon continued, his grip on my hand tightening with urgent intensity. "I do not play their dirty games. I refuse to be complicit in this evil. That envelope in your pocket contains $50,000 in untraceable cash." My eyes widened in shock. $50,000? "Trent gave it to me 3 months ago," Dayon explained rapidly, keeping his voice low to compete with the howling wind. "He told me to lock it in my home safe. He said he was sheltering some liquid assets from the hedge fund for a rainy day, but I know exactly what he was doing. He was hiding cash to ensure you could not touch it during the divorce settlement. He thought because I am married to his sister, I would just blindly protect his assets. He thought wrong." Dion looked back at the Range Rover. The brake lights flared. He knew he only had seconds left. "Take this money, Brianna. Do not deposit it in any bank where his corporate lawyers can track it. Use it to survive. Use it to disappear for a while. And when you are ready, get a ruthless lawyer and burn my arrogant brother-in-law to the absolute ground." Kendra rolled down the passenger window of the Range Rover, her shrill voice piercing the freezing air. "Dion, what is taking so long? Get in the SUV, we are freezing out here." Dion ignored his wife for one final second. He looked down at me, his eyes filled with a fierce, unwavering solidarity. "I will not tell them where you are. Survive this, Brianna. You are infinitely stronger than all of them combined." He released my hand, stood up, and sprinted through the deep snow toward my stolen SUV. He climbed into the driver's seat and put the car in gear. I lay paralyzed on the icy wood, watching as the two vehicles finally turned around in the narrow dirt driveway. Their headlights swept across the run-down motor lodge one last time before they pulled out onto the main road, their red taillights vanishing instantly into the violent whiteout of the blizzard. I was completely alone again. I tried to move, commanding my arms to push my body off the frozen planks, but my muscles completely refused to obey. The heavy envelope in my pocket felt like a brick against my side, a strange beacon of hope in a moment of pure despair. I had cash. I had a chance to fight back. But I had to get inside the cabin first. I managed to drag myself a few inches toward the flimsy wooden door, but the physical toll of the day finally reached its absolute peak. The sudden, violent withdrawal from my missed IVF hormone doses collided with the hypothermic temperatures. A blinding wave of nausea washed over me, followed by a sharp, radiating pain in my pelvis that stole the very last ounce of breath from my lungs. The flickering red light of the motel vacancy sign above me blurred into a continuous bleeding streak of color. The howling wind sounded like a roar in my ears. I clutched the fabric of my coat over the hidden envelope, curling into a tight fetal position on the ice. The cold stopped stinging and started to feel dangerously warm. My eyes fluttered shut, and I surrendered to the heavy, suffocating darkness, letting unconsciousness pull me under. The storm raged on, burying my motionless body under a thin layer of fresh snow. Then a new sound cut through the howling wind. Heavy, deliberate boots crunched rhythmically through the deep snow. The footsteps were unhurried, but possessed a commanding, lethal purpose. The door of the neighboring cabin swung open, groaning against the wind. Wyatt Sinclair stepped out into the blizzard. At 42 years old, he cut an imposing figure. He was rugged and massive, with a thick, dark beard and piercing eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Wearing a heavy flannel jacket that barely contained the broad span of his shoulders, he looked exactly like what he used to be, a tough, unyielding sheriff who commanded total authority. Wyatt's sharp gaze swept across the desolate property and instantly locked onto my lifeless form, crumpled on the frozen porch. His jaw tightened. He did not hesitate or call out for help. He moved with the swift, trained precision of a man accustomed to life and death emergencies. Wyatt crossed the distance between our cabins in a few massive strides, his heavy boots destroying the snowdrifts in his path. He crouched beside me, pulling off a thick leather glove to press two warm fingers against my freezing neck, checking for a pulse. Finding a faint rhythm, Wyatt slipped his massive arms underneath my knees and shoulders. With effortless, raw strength, he scooped my unconscious body up from the icy wood, pulling me tight against his broad, warm chest to shield me from the violent wind. He turned his back to the storm and carried me away from the freezing shack, stepping into the safety of his own home. Warmth was the very first sensation to pierce through the icy void holding me captive. The biting, merciless wind of the Chicago blizzard was gone, replaced by the comforting rhythmic crackle of burning cedar. I slowly fluttered my eyes open, my vision adjusting to the dim golden light of a rustic living room. I was lying on a deep brown leather sofa, buried beneath a heavy heated thermal blanket. My freezing damp wool coat had been removed and draped over a wooden chair near the hearth to dry. Panic instantly spiked in my chest as my memory slammed back into place. Dion's envelope. I bolted upright, ignoring the sharp, protesting ache in my pelvis. I frantically scanned the room and spotted my coat. I threw off the thermal blanket and stumbled toward the chair, plunging my hand into the deep pocket. The thick, rigid shape of the envelope was still there, completely untouched. $50,000 in untraceable cash, safe and sound. I let out a shaky breath, slumping back onto the leather sofa, closing my eyes in fleeting relief. A heavy floorboard groaned. I whipped my head around to see the man who had pulled me from the ice. Up close, Wyatt Sinclair was even more imposing than he had appeared in the storm. He wore a faded thermal Henley that stretched tightly across his massive shoulders and arms. His dark beard was neatly trimmed, framing a jawline carved from absolute granite. He carried a steaming mug of coffee in one hand and a stack of firewood in the other. He moved with a quiet, lethal grace that commanded immediate respect. He set the wood down by the hearth and handed me the coffee without a single word. His hands were calloused, rugged, and incredibly warm. "Drink this," he instructed, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that instantly grounded my racing heart. "You were practically frozen solid when I found you on the porch. The storm knocked out the power lines on the main road, but my generator is running fine. You are safe here." I wrapped my trembling fingers around the hot ceramic mug, muttering a raspy expression of gratitude. I reached into my unzipped laptop bag, which he had thoughtfully carried inside, and placed by the sofa to grab my phone. I needed to see what time it was to figure out exactly how long I had been unconscious. As the screen illuminated, a barrage of notifications flooded the display. One email marked urgent sat at the very top of my inbox. It was from the Human Resources Department of the digital marketing firm where I had worked flawlessly for the past 5 years. I tapped the screen, my eyes rapidly scanning the dense block of corporate jargon. The mug of coffee nearly slipped from my hands, hot liquid sloshing over the rim. It was a notice of immediate termination. The words leaped off the screen like venomous strikes. I had been fired, effective immediately, without severance, without a warning, and without any transition period. I read the second paragraph, and my blood ran colder than the blizzard raging outside the cabin windows. Trent had not just evicted me and drained my bank accounts. He had financially and professionally slaughtered me. The email stated that my firm had suffered a catastrophic breach of confidential client data. The leak had specifically targeted the marketing portfolios of the firm's wealthiest corporate investors. Trent had weaponized his powerful status as a senior hedge fund manager. He had contacted the executive board of my agency directly threatening to pull his fund's massive accounts and orchestrate a full-scale corporate boycott across the city unless the supposed source of the leak was immediately terminated and blacklisted from the industry. He provided fabricated digital footprints and manipulated IP logs pointing directly to my secure company login. He framed me. He knew my marketing salary was the only legitimate income I had left to fight him in divorce court, and he used his unchecked corporate power to obliterate my professional reputation in a matter of minutes. No agency in the country would ever hire a marketing specialist accused of leaking high-tier financial data. I had no husband, no home, no bank accounts, and now no career. Trent had ensured I was entirely erased from the map. A ragged, breathless sob tore from my throat. I dropped the phone onto the leather cushion, burying my face in my hands. The sheer magnitude of Trent's cruelty was suffocating. I had given that man my youth, my health, and my absolute devotion, and he was hunting me down like sport. I thought I had hit rock bottom when I collapsed on the porch, but Trent had brought a shovel to dig the hole even deeper. Wyatt stepped away from the fireplace. He walked into the adjoining kitchen and returned a moment later carrying a large ceramic bowl of hearty beef stew. He set it gently on the wooden coffee table in front of me. He did not ask invasive questions. He did not offer hollow, meaningless platitudes about how things would eventually get better. He simply pulled up a chair, sat directly across from me, and looked at me with those piercing, observant eyes. "Eat," he commanded softly. "You cannot fight a war on an empty stomach, and you look like you are about to step onto a battlefield." I picked up the spoon, my hands still shaking violently from the emotional shock and the lingering hormonal withdrawal. As I shifted my weight on the sofa, my unzipped laptop bag tipped over entirely. The thick, heavy stack of my IVF medical files slid out, spilling across the rustic floorboards. The glossy logo of the fertility clinic was printed boldly across the top folder. The brutal documented record of 104 injections, endless ultrasounds, and shattered hopes lay scattered on the rug for a stranger to see. I reached down to gather them, wincing and letting out a sharp gasp as another stabbing pain radiated through my abdomen. Wyatt leaned forward to help me pick up the scattered papers. His sharp eyes scanned the clinic logo and the dense medical jargon printed on the front page. He paused, his rugged brow furrowing in intense concentration. He looked from the files to my pale, pain-stricken face, analyzing my physical state. "You are going through severe hormone withdrawal," he stated, recognizing the physical symptoms with surprising medical accuracy for a former sheriff. I nodded, too exhausted to hide the shame and the agony anymore. I wrapped my arms around my stomach, waiting for the inevitable pity. But Wyatt did not look pitying. He tapped his calloused finger against the thick medical file. He looked at me with an expression of quiet, dangerous calculation. "Let me borrow these files for the night," he said, his deep voice carrying a strange underlying tension that demanded attention. "I have a buddy in the medical field who owes me a massive favor. Something about these clinic records does not sit right with me, and I want him to look at your lab results immediately." I stared at his outstretched hand, my mind struggling to process the request. The files were deeply personal, a documented history of my perceived failures. But looking into Wyatt's steady, unyielding gaze, I realized I had absolutely nothing left to hide and nothing left to lose. I nodded slowly, pushing the thick stack of folders across the rustic coffee table. I told him to take them. If his friend could find any logical medical reason why my body felt like it was tearing itself apart, I desperately needed to know. Wyatt gathered the heavy documents, gave me a curt nod, and retreated to his side of the cabin to make his phone calls. I spent the remainder of the night wrapped tightly in the thermal blanket, the sheer exhaustion finally dragging me into a fitful, nightmare-filled sleep. When I woke the next morning, the blizzard had passed, leaving behind a blindingly bright, frozen landscape outside the window. I ate the rest of the stew and paced the small perimeter of the living room. The physical cramps in my abdomen had dulled to a persistent ache, but the anxiety gnawing at my chest only grew sharper as the hours ticked by. I checked my phone repeatedly, staring at the zero balances in my bank accounts, the stark reality of Trent's financial slaughter haunting my every thought. It was just past 2 in the afternoon when the heavy wooden door swung open. Wyatt stepped inside, bringing a gust of freezing air with him. But it was not the winter cold that made me shiver. It was his face. The calm, composed demeanor he had maintained the night before was completely gone. In its place was a storm of raw, barely contained fury. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles ticked beneath his dark beard. He did not bother taking off his snow-covered boots. He strode directly across the room and slammed my thick medical file onto the wooden table with a violent force that made the ceramic coffee mugs jump. I flinched, stepping back instinctively. I asked him what was wrong and what his friend had discovered in the files. Wyatt did not offer me a sympathetic look, a gentle touch, or any hollow words of comfort. He offered me pure, unadulterated rage on my behalf. He told me to listen to him very carefully. He stated clearly that I was not broken, I was not barren, and I had never been the reason those fertility treatments failed. I shook my head, profound confusion clouding my mind. That made no sense. The elite clinic had run hundreds of tests over the years. They had shown me the lab results on their sleek monitors. My hormone levels were always deemed inadequate, my egg viability constantly questioned. Wyatt leaned over the table, his massive hands planting flat against the wood as he looked directly into my eyes. "Your doctor was bought off by Trent," he stated with absolute terrifying certainty. "The lab results you were shown for the past 6 years were entirely fabricated. My contact dug into the clinic's encrypted server logs early this morning to verify the raw data. Your biological markers are perfect. You are perfectly healthy and fully capable of having children." The air vanished from my lungs. I reached out, gripping the back of the leather armchair just to keep myself upright. If I was healthy, then why did the transfers never work? Why did we spend 6 years doing this? Because Trent is 100% sterile due to a surgical complication at age 20. Wyatt said the words, striking my chest like heavy stones. He has known his entire adult life that he is completely incapable of fathering a child naturally. He subjected you to 6 years of hormone injections just to shift the blame onto you. The room began to spin violently. The rustic walls of the cabin warped and tilted. I stared at the medical files scattered on the table, the glossy logos of the prestigious Chicago fertility clinic mocking me. Trent knew. He knew he was permanently sterile the entire time we were married. I gasped for air, my chest heaving uncontrollably as the horrific, twisted reality locked into place. I asked, my voice rising in pure hysteria, if my husband had knowingly subjected me to 6 years of painful hormone injections, highly invasive surgeries, and crippling psychological abuse just to cover up his own medical secret. Wyatt did not look away. "Yes," he confirmed, his eyes blazing with a fierce, protective fire. Trent knew his mother demanded a biological heir, and he knew his pristine corporate image required a perfect family. Instead of admitting his own biological reality, he paid a corrupt specialist an exorbitant amount of money to gaslight you. He used your healthy body as a medical punching bag to hide his own inadequacy. He watched you cry, watched you suffer the severe side effects, and let his mother tear you down at every family dinner, all to protect his arrogant, fragile ego. "And the intern," I whispered, the final puzzle piece sliding into its sickening slot. "If Trent is entirely sterile, then Lexi cannot possibly be carrying his child." "Lexi is pregnant by someone else," Wyatt finished bluntly. "Whether Trent knows that, or is actively deceiving himself to maintain his perfect narrative, does not matter right now. What matters is that your husband orchestrated a 6-year-long campaign of physical and mental torture against you." The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hit me like a speeding freight train. It was not just a sudden divorce. It was not just financial ruin or a younger mistress. It was systematic, highly calculated torture by the man who had stood at an altar and promised to love and protect me. The visceral memory of the 104 injections flashed through my mind. The agonizing pelvic cramps, the countless nights spent crying on the cold bathroom floor, the the cruel, dismissive remarks from Barbara about my supposedly barren womb. Trent had watched me apologize to him for failing to give him a baby, knowing full well he was the one shooting blanks. It all crashed down on me in a suffocating, unbearable avalanche of grief and fury. My knees buckled completely. I could no longer support the weight of my own body or the devastating truth I had just learned. I dropped toward the hardwood floor, a raw, agonizing scream tearing from the deepest part of my soul. It was a sound of pure, shattered devastation, mourning the years of my life and the health stolen by an absolute monster. But before my knees could hit the wooden planks, Wyatt was there. He moved with incredible trained speed, dropping down and catching me firmly against his broad chest. He wrapped his powerful arms around my shaking body, holding me securely, as I sobbed and screamed into his heavy flannel shirt. I buried my face in his chest, my fingers digging desperately into his jacket as the world I thought I knew shattered into jagged pieces around me. Wyatt did not tell me to calm down or shush my cries. He just held me tighter, anchoring me to the earth. When I finally opened my tear-soaked eyes to look up at him, I saw his gaze harden into cold, unbreakable steel. He was not looking at me with pity. He was staring out the frost-covered window, his eyes narrowing with a lethal, terrifying promise. I stayed wrapped in his arms until the violent tremors shaking my body finally subsided into exhausted, heavy breaths. Wyatt slowly guided me back to the leather sofa, grabbing a clean towel from the kitchen to gently wipe the tears and smeared makeup from my face. The silence in the cabin was thick-heavy with the magnitude of the horrific truth I had just learned. My mind was racing, connecting the dots of my own misery, but one glaring question suddenly cut through the fog of my grief. I looked up at him, my voice hoarse and completely drained. How do you have a buddy who can just casually hack into the encrypted servers of the most elite fertility clinic in Chicago? You are a retired county sheriff living in a cabin. That kind of medical data is protected by firewalls that cost millions. Wyatt set the towel down on the coffee table. He did not look away, nor did he offer a sheepish excuse. He leaned back in his heavy wooden chair, letting out a long, measured breath before resting his elbows on his knees. I am a retired sheriff, he stated calmly, his deep voice carrying an undeniable weight of authority. But that was a career choice I made a few years ago to escape the pressure of my actual life. This cabin, this quiet town, it is a retreat. My full name is Wyatt Sinclair. I stared at him blankly. The name Sinclair echoed in my head, triggering a distant corporate recognition. I had worked in high-level digital marketing for 5 years. I knew the major players in the American economy. Sinclair Health Innovations was a multi-billion-dollar medical empire owning the largest chain of private hospitals, research facilities, and advanced reproductive clinics across the country. They practically monopolized the private healthcare sector. You are the heir to Sinclair Health, I whispered, the reality crashing over me. You own the infrastructure that my clinic operates on. That is how your contact accessed my files so easily. They were looking at their own servers. Wyatt nodded slowly. My father built the company from the ground up. When he passed away 5 years ago, I inherited the controlling shares. But the corporate bloodshed, the relentless greed of the executive board, it completely burned me out. I handed over day-to-day operations to a proxy CEO and stepped away, pinning on a badge in a quiet county just to feel like I was doing honest, tangible work again. I needed to step away from the empire before it turned me into a monster. He stood up and began pacing the length of the rustic living room, the tension radiating from his massive frame. But my proxy failed. He continued, his tone turning razor sharp. The executive board is currently attempting a hostile takeover. They want to oust me from the chairman's seat and sell off the research divisions to overseas investors who care absolutely nothing about patient care. I have to step back into the bloodbath and reclaim my board. I have to return to Chicago immediately to crush this takeover before they dismantle my father's legacy. I watched him pace, entirely mesmerized by the sudden transformation. The rugged, quiet man who had carried me through the blizzard was disappearing, replaced by a ruthless, commanding billionaire ready to wage corporate war. But I still did not understand where I fit into this massive revelation. Why are you telling me this? I asked, pulling the thermal blanket tighter around my shoulders. Wyatt stopped pacing and turned to face me. Because my father was a traditionalist. He built a strict morality and stability clause into the family trust and the corporate bylaws. To activate my supreme voting rights and instantly block the board's hostile takeover, I cannot just walk in as a rogue, isolated bachelor. I need to present a stable, unified front. I need to be a family man. He crossed the room, stopping inches from where I sat. He looked down at me, his piercing eyes analyzing my battered, resilient spirit. I see the way you survived that storm, Brianna. I see the absolute fire in you even after the man you loved spent 6 years trying to break you. You need resources, protection, and vengeance. I need a wife. I stopped breathing. The proposal hung in the air, audacious and terrifyingly logical. "Marry me," Wyatt commanded softly, crouching down so we were perfectly eye to eye. "Marry me. I will give you the best fertility treatments in the world, managed directly by my top specialists, untainted by anyone's corruption. You will have the children you deserve, and I will give you the absolute, unchecked power to crush Trent into dust. A marriage of convenience, a transaction born of mutual desperation and fueled by righteous anger." I thought about Trent sitting in his pristine mansion laughing with his intern while stealing my jewelry. I thought about the 104 painful injections I had endured for a man who was biologically incapable of giving me a family. Wyatt was offering me the exact weapons I needed to destroy the man who had erased my life. More importantly, he was offering me the very thing Trent had used to torture me. He was offering me a child. I looked into Wyatt's steady, unyielding eyes and nodded. Yes. 48 hours later, the blizzard had cleared, leaving the roads icy but passable. I wore a simple black dress I had packed in my frantic eviction, and Wyatt wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit that instantly broadcast his immense wealth and power. We drove to the county courthouse in his heavy-duty truck, walking past the metal detectors and into the sterile magistrate's office. We signed the marriage license with quick, efficient strokes of a pen. No flowers, no vows, no audience, just a binding legal contract forged in the fires of retribution. The magistrate stamped the document, and just like that, I was Brianna Sinclair. Wyatt placed a warm, heavy hand on the small of my back as we stepped out through the heavy glass doors of the courthouse. The biting winter air hit my face, but for the first time in days, I did not feel cold. I felt invincible. Before we could descend the concrete steps, my cheap burner phone, the one Dion had insisted I buy with the hidden cash, began to vibrate wildly in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and frowned at the screen. Somehow Trent had tracked down my new number. I answered the call, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "Well, look who finally picked up!" Trent sneered through the speaker, his voice dripping with unbearable arrogance. "Enjoying the slums, Brianna. I am just calling to give you a heads up. My lawyers are filing a massive lawsuit against you this afternoon. Since you clearly hid your barren medical status from me for 6 years, I am officially suing you for fraud. I am reclaiming every single dime I spent on your useless IVF treatments. See you in court, you pathetic liar." The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear, staring at the blank screen. I did not cry. I did not shake. I looked up at my new billionaire husband, a slow, icy smile spreading across my lips. I laughed, a loud, sharp sound that echoed across the concrete steps of the county courthouse, cutting through the biting winter air. It was not a laugh of hysteria or panic, but of pure, unadulterated amusement. Wyatt looked down at me, his dark eyebrows raising in a silent question as he unlocked his heavy-duty truck. "Trent is suing me for fraud," I told him, sliding into the heated passenger seat. "He wants to reclaim every single dime he spent on the IVF treatments because he claims I deliberately hid my barren medical status from him." The absolute audacity of that man trying to use the legal system to punish me for a biological failure that belongs entirely to him is almost poetic. Wyatt shut his door, the heavy thud sealing us inside the warm cabin of the truck. "Let him try," Wyatt said, shifting the vehicle into gear with a smooth, practiced motion. By the time his corporate lawyers finished drafting that ridiculous lawsuit, He will not even have the funds to pay their retainer. But right now, we have much more important things to focus on. We have an appointment. We drove away from the rural snow-covered town and headed straight into the towering steel and glass heart of downtown Chicago. Wyatt pulled up to a massive gleaming skyscraper that looked more like the headquarters of a global tech conglomerate than a medical facility. The polished chrome letters above the grand entrance read Sinclair Elite Clinic. This was the crown jewel of his family's medical empire, a facility catering exclusively to the highest echelon of society. As we walked through the sweeping automatic doors, the stark contrast between this ultra-luxury facility and the corrupt, sterile clinic Trent had forced me to use was staggering. The lobby featured soaring, vaulted ceilings, cascading water features, and plush, velvet seating areas. But what struck me the most was the immediate, palpable shift in the atmosphere the second Wyatt stepped over the threshold. The impeccably dressed receptionists froze at their stations. Security guards immediately stood straighter. The chief medical administrator, a distinguished woman in a tailored suit, practically sprinted across the marble floor to greet us. "Mr. Sinclair," she said, her voice breathless with absolute deference as she bowed her head slightly. "We were not expecting you to return to the facility so soon. Welcome back, sir." Wyatt did not miss a beat. He placed a heavy protective hand on the small of my back and guided me forward. "This is my wife, Brianna Sinclair," he commanded, his deep voice, leaving no room for hesitation or questions. "She requires our absolute best care, effectively, immediately. Clear Dr. Gallagher's schedule for the rest of the afternoon and prepare the penthouse consultation suite." The administrator scrambled to obey, ushering us into a private gold-paneled elevator that shot straight to the top floor. Within minutes, I was sitting in a sunlit, luxurious medical suite that felt like a five-star hotel room. Dr. Gallagher, the head of reproductive medicine, and a fiercely loyal ally to Wyatt's late father, entered the room with my hacked medical files already in hand. Dr. Gallagher was thorough and blunt. He confirmed every horrifying detail Wyatt had discovered. Trent's corrupt specialist had been pumping my body full of aggressive, completely unnecessary synthetic hormones, specifically designed to mimic the physical symptoms of a failing reproductive cycle. They had intentionally suppressed my natural biology to maintain the illusion that I was the problem. "Your body is remarkably resilient, Brianna," Dr. Gallagher said, offering me a reassuring smile. "We are going to flush these synthetic toxins from your system with a specialized protocol. Once your natural baseline is restored, you are a prime candidate for immediate conception. Your uterine lining and ovarian reserves are completely flawless. Now, regarding the next steps for fertilization, we have access to the world's most exclusive anonymous donor registries. We can begin matching profiles today." I nodded, feeling a wave of overwhelming relief wash over me, but before I could ask to see the donor catalog, Wyatt stepped forward. He placed his large calloused hand gently over mine, stopping me from reaching for the tablet Dr. Gallagher was holding out. "We do not need a donor catalog," Wyatt said, his piercing eyes locking directly onto mine. "We are fighting this war together, Brianna. We are legally married, and we are going to build an empire that Trent could never even dream of touching. Let me be the donor. Let us do this properly." The room went completely silent. I stared up at this rugged, massive man who had pulled me from the freezing snow just a few days ago. This was no longer just a cold business transaction to secure his corporate voting rights. The raw vulnerability in his expression, the fierce protective warmth in his grip, told me everything I needed to know. He actually wanted to create a life with me. He saw my worth, my strength, and my resilience, and he wanted to merge his legacy with mine. A sudden, intense flutter sparked in my chest, completely unrelated to any medical procedure. It was the undeniable spark of genuine, deep romance. I looked at his strong jawline and the soft, hopeful anticipation in his eyes. "Yes," I whispered, my heart racing with sudden, thrilling joy. "Yes, I want that." The following 2 weeks at the Sinclair Elite Clinic were a revelation. I was treated like absolute royalty. There were no cold bathroom floors, no agonizing self-administered injections, and no cruel comments from a narcissistic husband. Instead, I resided in a plush, VIP recovery lounge. Wyatt was by my side for every single blood draw and every mild, carefully monitored treatment. We spent hours talking in that sunlit suite. He shared his visions for expanding his father's medical empire to provide better care for marginalized communities, and I shared my strategic marketing ideas to help him execute that vision. The transactional nature of our marriage rapidly dissolved into late-night conversations, shared laughter, and stolen passionate kisses that left me breathless. When Wyatt kissed me, it was not the rushed, obligatory contact I had endured with Trent. It was deep, consuming, and filled with a profound respect that made my entire body hum with electricity. I was finally healing, blossoming under the care of a man who actually worshipped the ground I walked on. My hormone levels stabilized beautifully, and the highly anticipated embryo transfer was scheduled and executed flawlessly. For the first time in 6 years, I felt a genuine, radiant hope taking root inside my body. I was lounging on the velvet sofa in my private suite, waiting for Wyatt to return from a brief board meeting downstairs. I reached for the cheap burner phone Dion had told me to buy, wanting to check the news. As soon as the screen lit up, a notification banner flashed across the top. I had created a dummy social media account to keep tabs on Trent's public movements, and the algorithm had just pushed a new post to my feed. It was from Lexi's public profile. I tapped the notification, and a brightly filtered photograph filled my screen. Lexi was lying on a medical bed in what looked like a gaudy faux luxury ultrasound clinic. She was holding up a long strip of black and white sonogram pictures, her face painted with a smug, victorious grin. Trent was leaning over her, kissing her cheek, looking every bit the proud, expectant father. I stared at the caption printed in bold letters beneath the photo. "Thanks for making room for a real woman. Boy Mom upgraded." I stared at the caption printed in bold letters beneath the photo. "Thanks for making room for a real woman. Boy Mom upgraded." A month ago, those cruel words would have completely shattered me. I would have spent hours hyperventilating on a cold bathroom floor, dissecting every perceived flaw in my body, agonizing over why my fierce devotion was never enough to sustain my marriage. But sitting in the sunlit penthouse suite of the Sinclair Elite Clinic, wrapped in luxurious cashmere and carrying a secret that was about to detonate Trent's entire reality, I felt absolutely nothing. I did not shed a single tear. I did not type out an angry defensive response. I simply locked the screen of the cheap burner phone and tossed it face down onto the velvet cushion beside me. Lexi was desperate for a reaction, starved for the superficial validation that comes from kicking a woman while she is down. She could have her heavily filtered, fabricated reality. I was entirely too busy building an empire. The heavy mahogany door to the suite clicked open. Wyatt stepped inside fresh from his aggressive corporate board meeting downstairs. He had shed his suit jacket, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing the corded muscle of his forearms. He took one look at my face and crossed the room in 3 massive strides, his sharp eyes scanning my expression for any sign of lingering distress. Before he could demand to know what was wrong, the door swung open again. Dr. Gallagher walked in holding a sleek digital medical tablet. His usual clinical composure was entirely replaced by a beaming, uncharacteristically wide smile. He did not bother with formal medical introductions or professional pleasantries. He simply looked at Wyatt, then directly at me, and delivered the greatest news of my entire life. "Your blood serum levels are off the charts in the best possible way, Brianna." Dr. Gallagher announced, his voice ringing with absolute, undeniable triumph. The implantation was a flawless success. "You are pregnant. And based on these preliminary hormone surges, you are not just having one baby. Both embryos took hold perfectly. You are carrying twins." The air left my lungs in a sudden, dizzying rush of pure, paralyzing joy. Twins. After 6 years of being maliciously told my body was a barren wasteland, after 104 agonizing injections that Trent knew were never meant to work, I was going to be a mother to 2 healthy babies. Wyatt did not speak a single word. the rugged, fearsome billionaire who had just spent 2 hours mercilessly tearing apart a boardroom full of corporate sharks, dropped directly to his knees right in front of the sofa. He wrapped his massive arms tightly around my waist and buried his face against my stomach. I felt his broad, powerful shoulders shaking silently as he let out a ragged, overwhelmed breath. I ran my fingers through his dark hair, tears of genuine, unfiltered happiness finally spilling hot and fast down my cheeks. "We did it," I whispered, my voice breaking with overwhelming emotion. "We actually did it." Wyatt tilted his head up, his piercing eyes shining with fierce, unbreakable protective devotion. "We did," he promised, pressing a firm, lingering kiss to my stomach before standing up to pull me into a crushing embrace. "You are going to be the most incredible mother in the world, and I swear I will burn down anyone who ever tries to make you doubt that again." Our perfect hard-won moment was suddenly shattered by a harsh, buzzing vibration. The cheap burner phone I had tossed onto the sofa was ringing relentlessly against the glass coffee table. The screen displayed an unknown blocked caller ID. My heart skipped a beat, the familiar, suffocating anxiety of my past life trying to claw its way back into my chest. Wyatt released me just enough to let me grab the device. I answered cautiously, putting the call on speaker so my husband could hear. "Brianna, do not hang up. It is Dayon." The deep, urgent voice of my former brother-in-law crackled through the speaker. He sounded incredibly out of breath, the loud, rhythmic pounding of heavy construction equipment echoing in the background. He was calling from one of his commercial architectural job sites, ensuring his toxic wife and manipulative mother-in-law were nowhere nearby. "Dion." "I am here," I said, leaning forward intently. "Are you okay?" "I am fine, but you are in serious danger right now." Dion rushed out, his words sharp and clipped with anxiety. "You need to call the police and lock down your social security number immediately. Trent is completely spiraling out of control. Lexi has been breathing down his neck, threatening to leave him and take the baby unless he proves his devotion by buying her a massive $5 million estate in the northern suburbs. She wants it paid entirely in cash, and she wants the closing finalized by the end of the month." I frowned, exchanging a deeply confused look with Wyatt. Trent makes a substantial income, but he certainly does not have $5 million in liquid cash just sitting around. His legitimate assets are totally frozen in the ongoing divorce proceedings. "That is exactly the problem," Dion said, his voice dropping to a harsh, conspiratorial whisper. "He does not have the money, so he is stealing it. Trent is quietly embezzling capital directly from his own hedge fund. He is illegally siphoning cash out of his most vulnerable client portfolios to cover the mansion purchase. But to move that kind of money without triggering an immediate federal audit, he needed a commercial bridge loan to cover the liquidity gap for 30 days. The corporate banking board demanded a clean credit guarantor. A sickening, horrifying realization began to form in the pit of my stomach. "Dion, what did he do?" "He forged your signature." Brianna Dion confirmed, his utter disgust radiating clearly through the phone. I overheard Barbara bragging to Kendra in my own kitchen about how brilliant Trent is. "He dug up old guarantor documents from the first year of your marriage, altered the execution dates, and blatantly forged your signature to bypass the mandatory credit check. He is intentionally tying his financial crimes directly to your name. If the hedge fund collapses before he can secretly replace the stolen capital, the federal authorities will come looking for you. He is setting you up to take the ultimate fall for his embezzlement. Call a ruthless lawyer and report the identity theft immediately before he signs the final closing documents on Friday." Dayon hung up quickly, leaving the line dead. The silence in the penthouse suite was heavy, thick with the toxic implication of Trent's staggering, desperate criminality. He was not just trying to replace me with a younger woman, he was actively trying to frame me for federal fraud, simply to fund his mistress's lavish, entitled lifestyle. A normal person would have panicked. The old Brianna would have been hyperventilating, calling the local police precinct in a state of absolute mindless terror, desperately trying to freeze her credit and stop the fraudulent transaction. But I was not the old Brianna anymore. I was Brianna Sinclair, and I was holding the hand of a billionaire who practically owned the very ground Trent walked on. I looked up at Wyatt. I did not cry. I did not shake with fear. Instead, a slow predatory smile spread across my face. Wyatt looked down at me, and his rugged, handsome features mirrored my exact expression. His eyes gleamed with a ruthless, calculated corporate hunger that would have terrified Trent to his very core. "We are not calling the police," I said softly, tossing the burner phone back onto the table. "If we stop him now, he gets away with a minor slap on the wrist." Wyatt pulled his sleek smartphone from his pocket, his thumb already dialing his elite corporate legal team. "You are absolutely right," Wyatt agreed, a dark, lethal chuckle rumbling deep in his chest. "We are going to let him buy that house. We are going to let him sign those forged legal documents and finalize the embezzlement." Wyatt lifted the phone to his ear, his gaze locking onto mine with absolute unwavering solidarity. "Get my lead litigator on the line," he commanded into the receiver, his voice echoing with unchecked authority. "It is time to let Trent dig his own grave." The mandatory asset mediation session was scheduled for a bleak Tuesday morning in a sterile glass-walled conference room downtown. The legal summons had arrived at the cabin 2 weeks prior, a final aggressive attempt by Trent's corporate lawyers to bully me into absolute submission. They wanted me to sign away any remaining lingering claims to his hedge fund portfolio and the luxury estate we had shared. In exchange, they were offering a pathetic, insulting settlement designed to humiliate me. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in Wyatt's bedroom, critically assessing my reflection. At 4 months pregnant with twins, my body had already begun to change significantly. The radiant, undeniable glow of a healthy pregnancy was impossible to miss, and a distinct, beautiful bump was firmly established. If Trent saw me looking this healthy, this vibrant, he would immediately know something was wrong. His entire narrative hinged on me being a broken, barren woman, destroyed by his rejection. Wyatt stepped up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his hands gently over my stomach. He kissed the curve of my neck, his dark eyes meeting mine in the mirror. "You look too happy, Brianna," he murmured, a dangerous, thrilling edge to his deep voice. "If he sees you glowing like this, he might actually realize he is walking into a slaughterhouse." I smiled, leaning back against his solid, warm chest. "Then we need to fix that." I reached into the back of the closet and pulled out the oldest, most oversized trench coat I owned, a drab olive green monstrosity I had packed during my frantic eviction. I slipped it on, buttoning it all the way up to my chin. The heavy, rigid fabric completely swallowed my figure, hiding any trace of the twin pregnancy. I scrubbed the subtle, warm makeup from my cheeks, leaving my skin looking pale and exhausted. I pulled my hair into a messy, severe bun. Staring back at the mirror, I perfectly played the part of the defeated, impoverished ex-wife Trent expected to see. Wyatt drove me to the mediation center in a nondescript sedan, parking a block away to maintain absolute secrecy. We had a plan meticulously crafted by his elite corporate legal team. I just needed to play my role for one more hour. When I pushed open the heavy glass door of the conference room, the toxic, suffocating atmosphere hit me instantly. Trent was already seated at the massive mahogany table, flanked by two aggressive-looking corporate attorneys. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit, looking every bit the arrogant, untouchable hedge fund manager. But it was the person sitting next to him that made my blood run cold. Lexi. She had no legal right to be at a private asset mediation between a husband and wife. But Trent had clearly brought her solely to inflict maximum emotional damage. At nearly 7 months pregnant, Lexi was wearing a skin-tight designer maternity dress that aggressively highlighted her swelling stomach. She leaned into Trent, resting her hand possessively over his arm, her lips curved into a smug, victorious smirk as I walked into the room. My court-appointed mediator, a tired-looking older man, gestured for me to sit on the opposite side of the table. I sank into the leather chair, pulling the oversized trench coat tightly around my body, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the polished wood surface. I forced my hands to tremble slightly as I clasped them in my lap. "Let us get this over with quickly," Trent announced, leaning back in his chair with a heavy sigh of feigned exhaustion. "My time is valuable, and Lexi needs to get back to her prenatal yoga class." Lexi giggled softly, a high piercing sound that grated against my nerves. She placed her hand over her stomach, making sure I was watching. "The baby has been kicking all morning," she said, her voice dripping with malicious intent. "He is just so active. Trent says he is going to be a star athlete." I kept my head down, refusing to engage with the bait. The mediator cleared his throat, shuffling a stack of legal documents. "Mr. Trent's legal team has proposed a final settlement." The mediator began, his voice dull and practiced. "In exchange for your signature relinquishing any and all claims to the marital estate, the hedge fund assets, and the primary residence, Mr. Trent is prepared to offer a one-time lump sum payment of $10,000. $10,000? It was a staggering, insulting joke. Trent easily spent $10,000 on a weekend golf trip. He was offering me absolute pennies for 7 years of marriage and the trauma he had inflicted. Trent leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He looked at my pale makeup-free face and the drab, oversized coat hiding my body. His eyes were completely devoid of empathy, filled only with a sick, triumphant satisfaction. "Take the money, Brianna," he said, his voice lowering to a cruel, mocking pitch. "I know you have been living in some freezing, rundown shack on the edge of town. 10 grand is more than generous for a woman who contributed absolutely nothing to my legacy. Take the cash, buy yourself a cheap apartment, and disappear. You lost. It is over." Lexi leaned her head against Trent's shoulder. "Just sign it," she chimed in, inspecting her manicured nails. "We have a $5 million mansion to close on this week, and we really do not want this depressing divorce dragging down our vibe." The mention of the $5 million mansion sent a sharp electric jolt of adrenaline straight to my core. Dion's warning echoed perfectly in my mind. Trent was embezzling from his own hedge fund to buy that house in cash, and he had forged my signature on the guarantor documents to bypass the credit check. If I fought him for a larger settlement today, my name would remain legally tethered to his active financial portfolio. I would be dragged down into the federal indictment when the embezzlement was finally discovered. But if I signed this insulting $10,000 agreement right now, I would be legally permanently severed from all his current, visible assets. I would be completely insulated from the catastrophic financial ruin that was about to hit him like a meteor. I kept my hands trembling as I reached across the table. I did not look at Trent. I did not look at Lexi. I picked up the heavy, expensive fountain pen provided by the mediator. "Are you sure you want to accept this offer?" The mediator asked, genuinely surprised by my lack of resistance. "You have the right to counter-offer or take this before a judge." I shook my head, keeping my voice small and defeated. "No," I whispered, staring blindly at the dense legal text. "I just want it to be over. I want to be completely severed from his accounts." I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name on the dotted line. I signed away the mansion. I signed away the hedge fund. I signed away every single asset Trent falsely believed made him powerful. Trent let out a sharp, victorious laugh, exchanging a high five with his aggressive lead attorney. He actually thought he had won. He thought he had successfully discarded me and secured his stolen wealth. He looked at me with absolute, unfiltered contempt as the mediator stamped the final pages. "Enjoy the shack," Brianna, Trent mocked, standing up and buttoning his custom suit jacket. "Try not to freeze to death." I stood up, pulling the oversized trench coat securely around my waist. I did not say a single word. I did not need to. I turned and walked out of the glass-walled conference room, leaving Trent and Lexi to gloat over their hollow victory. As the heavy door swung shut behind me, a slow, predatory smile finally broke across my face. Trent was completely, blissfully unaware that by forcing me to sign away those assets, he had just handed me the very shield I needed to survive his impending destruction. I walked down the long, carpeted corridor of the mediation center, the heavy glass door clicking shut behind me. The oppressive air of the conference room vanished, replaced by the cool, quiet hum of the building. Waiting for me at the end of the hallway was Wyatt. He stood with his back against the wall, arms crossed over his broad chest. He wore a simple dark jacket and jeans, intentionally dressing down to maintain the illusion of a retired rural law enforcement officer. But the way he held himself, a predator resting patiently in the shadows, radiated a dangerous kind of power that Trent was far too arrogant to recognize. Wyatt pushed off the wall as I approached, his dark eyes scanning my face for any sign of distress. I gave him a single definitive nod. The papers were signed, the trap was set. I was entirely legally severed from Trent. Before Wyatt could pull me into a protective embrace, the conference room door swung open again. Trent strutted into the hallway, adjusting his expensive silk tie. Lexi clung tightly to his other arm, her designer heels clicking loudly on the polished floor. They were laughing together, completely intoxicated by their hollow victory. Trent had just saved his precious hedge fund from his ex-wife, or so he thought. Trent's laughter died abruptly as he nearly collided with Wyatt's massive frame. Wyatt did not move a single inch. He stood planted on the floor like a deeply rooted oak tree, forcing Trent to take an awkward, stumbling step backward to avoid crashing into him. Trent looked Wyatt up and down, his lip curling into a sneer of utter disgust. He recognized the rugged, bearded man who had carried me out of the blizzard. He took in Wyatt's casual clothing, comparing it to his own custom-tailored suit, and his chest puffed out with misplaced superiority. "So this is the backup plan." Trent mocked, his voice echoing sharply down the quiet corridor. "You have to cling to a washed-up cop to survive. You signed away your only chance at a decent life for a miserable $10,000, just so you could run back to the frozen woods with this guy." Lexi giggled, leaning heavily against Trent. "It is actually kind of sad," she chimed in, eyeing my oversized drab trench coat. "She looks like a homeless person. I guess water seeks its own level." I felt Wyatt's large hand press gently against the small of my back, a silent, steadying anchor. I did not say a word. I did not need to defend myself, and I certainly did not need to defend the billionaire medical heir standing beside me. I just watched Trent with a calm, unnerving silence that seemed to irritate him even more. "You are a pathetic loser," Brianna Trent spat, stepping closer to Wyatt, attempting to assert dominance. "And you?" Trent pointed a manicured finger at Wyatt's chest. "You better get used to paying her bills because she is entirely broke and completely useless." Wyatt did not flinch. He did not raise his voice or puff out his chest. He looked down at Trent with the cold, detached fascination of a man observing an insect right before stepping on it. Wyatt slowly reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his sleek, encrypted smartphone. He did not look at the screen. He kept his piercing eyes locked dead onto Trent's arrogant face. With a single deliberate motion of his thumb, Wyatt typed out one specific word and hit send. Execute. The silence in the hallway stretched for exactly 3 seconds, then the chaos began. It started with a sharp, frantic buzzing from inside Trent's suit pocket. He ignored it, keeping his arrogant glare fixed on Wyatt. But the ringing did not stop. It escalated into a persistent blaring ringtone. Seconds later, the phones of the two aggressive corporate attorneys standing a few feet away also erupted into a synchronized chorus of panicked rings and vibrating alerts. "Are you going to answer that?" Wyatt asked, his deep voice smooth as velvet and cold as ice. Trent scoffed, pulling the phone from his pocket with an annoyed sigh. He glanced at the caller ID, expecting a minor office nuisance. Instead, all the color instantly drained from his face. It was his chief financial officer. Trent answered the call, bringing the device to his ear. "What is it?" "We just finished the mediation." I could hear the frantic, high-pitched screaming of the executive on the other end of the line, even from where I stood. Trent's posture rigidified. His arrogant sneer dissolved into absolute raw terror. "What do you mean we are locked out?" Trent barked, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "That is impossible. I am the senior partner. Check the server logs again." The attorneys behind him were already answering their own phones, their faces turning ashen as they listened to the simultaneous disaster unfolding at their corporate headquarters. One of the lawyers dropped his briefcase, the leather slamming loudly against the floor. "They are liquidating the assets," one attorney shouted, interrupting Trent's call. "The margin calls are triggering automatically. Every single one of our institutional accounts has been frozen by a hostile acquiring entity." Trent's eyes widened in sheer horror. He scrambled with his phone, frantically opening his mobile banking and trading applications. I watched his thumbs fly across the screen, desperately refreshing the pages. I knew exactly what he was seeing. Red errors, locked accounts, zero balances. The exact same terrifying digital execution he had subjected me to on the day he threw me into the blizzard. He had financially erased me without a second thought, and now the universe was delivering the exact same punishment with a devastating multiplier. "Who is doing this?" Trent screamed into his phone, completely abandoning his polished high society facade. "Who has the capital to freeze a multi-billion-dollar fund in 3 minutes?" He listened to the response from his chief financial officer, and his knees visibly buckled. He staggered backward, slamming against the glass wall of the conference room. Lexi tried to grab his arm, asking him what was wrong, but Trent shoved her away, his breathing turning rapid and shallow. "Sinclair." Trent gasped, the word tasting like poison on his tongue. "Sinclair Holdings. They just initiated an aggressive hostile takeover of the entire firm. The board folded immediately. They sold us out. Everything is frozen. I cannot access the capital." Lexi's eyes went wide with confusion and fear. "Trent, the closing on the mansion is on Friday. The $5 million in cash. You need to transfer that today." "I do not have $5 million. Trent roared, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. "I do not have 5 cents. Sinclair Holdings just seized the parent company. I am completely locked out of my own empire." I stood beside Wyatt, feeling the satisfying heavy weight of absolute justice settle over my shoulders. Trent was hyperventilating, staring at his frozen digital portfolio. He had embezzled millions from his clients to buy a mansion for his mistress, banking entirely on the liquidity of his hedge fund to cover his tracks before the federal auditors noticed. Now that liquidity was completely gone, the new acquiring corporation would immediately launch a hostile forensic audit. They would find the missing funds. They would find the forged guarantor signatures. He was trapped. Wyatt slipped his phone back into his jacket pocket. He wrapped a strong protective arm around my waist, gently guiding me down the hallway toward the exit. We did not look back. We just kept walking, leaving Trent drowning in the catastrophic financial ruin he had so arrogantly dug for himself. The fallout from the Sinclair Holdings takeover was instantaneous and absolute. Within 24 hours, the polished, untouchable facade Trent had spent his entire adult life cultivating shattered into jagged, irreparable pieces. His security badges were deactivated, his corporate email was locked. Every single financial avenue he tried to access greeted him with the exact same terrifying red error message he had used to terrorize me. He was completely financially suffocated. But the locked accounts were only the beginning of his nightmare. The ticking time bomb was the $5 million mansion. The closing was scheduled for Friday morning. Lexi, completely oblivious to the radioactive danger Trent was in, was already bragging to her social circle about the luxury estate, booking expensive interior decorators and ordering custom nursery furniture on credit lines she assumed Trent would pay. Trent knew with absolute certainty that if he defaulted on that cash closing, the sellers would sue. Worse, the immediate forensic audit initiated by Sinclair Holdings would uncover the massive crater of embezzled funds he had desperately tried to hide. He needed $5 million in liquid cash, and he needed it immediately, or he was going to federal prison. Desperation drove him to the only place he had left, his mother's sprawling suburban home. That evening, the atmosphere in Barbara's formal dining room was suffocating. I knew the details of this gathering, because Dion recounted every glorious second to me later. Trent paced the length of the Persian rug, his custom suit wrinkled. His tie loosened, his hair disheveled from constantly running his trembling hands through it. Barbara sat at the head of the table, clutching a glass of wine, her face pale with shock, as her golden boy frantically paced. Kendra sat beside her mother, biting her nails. Dayon sat quietly at the opposite end of the table, watching the arrogant family that had always treated him like a second-class citizen completely unravel. "I need a bridge loan," Trent stammered, his voice cracking with panic. "Sinclair locked my assets during the acquisition transition. It is just a temporary freeze, but the sellers for Lexi's house will not wait. If I do not wire the $5 million by Friday, I lose the deposit. I face a massive breach of contract lawsuit, and the board will flag my accounts." Barbara set her wine glass down with a sharp clink. "I cannot access my trust, Trent. You moved my portfolio into your fund last year to boost your managed assets. My accounts are frozen with yours. Kendra whimpered, looking at her brother with wide, terrified eyes. What about your friends at the country club? Surely one of the other partners can float you a short-term loan. Trent let out a manic, breathless laugh. They are not returning my calls, Kendra. The entire financial district knows Sinclair Holdings orchestrated a hostile takeover. I am radioactive. Nobody is going to hand me $5 million in cash on a handshake while my firm is being audited by the most ruthless corporate acquirers in the country. The dining room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Trent was cornered, and the reality of his impending destruction was finally settling over the room. Then Barbara slowly turned her predatory gaze down the length of the long mahogany table. Her eyes locked directly onto Dion. Dion, Barbara commanded, her voice dropping into the familiar, entitled tone she always used when demanding obedience. Your architectural firm just secured those 3 massive commercial contracts downtown. Your business accounts are entirely separate from Trent's fund. You have immense corporate credit. Dion met his mother-in-law's gaze. He did not blink. He did not shift in his chair. He simply waited for her to articulate her absurd demand. You need to take out a commercial equity loan against your firm immediately, Barbara insisted, slapping her hand against the table as if finalizing a business deal. You can leverage your company's assets to secure the $5 million in cash. Trent can use it to close on the house, and he will pay your firm back with interest as soon as the Sinclair audit clears his accounts. It is the only logical solution. Kendra turned to her husband, her expression shifting from panic to immediate expectation. Yes, Dion, you have to do this. Trent is my brother. Family comes first. We elevated your social status when you married into this family. Now it is time for you to step up and prove your loyalty. Trent stopped pacing and stared at Dion, his eyes wide with desperate, entitled hope. You have the clean credit, Dion. You can walk into the bank tomorrow morning and have the wire transfer approved by Thursday. You have to save me. Dion looked at the 3 of them. He looked at Trent, the arrogant, sterile narcissist who had tortured an innocent woman for 6 years. He looked at Barbara, the toxic matriarch who had constantly belittled him, treating his hard-earned success as a self-made black architect as somehow inferior to her family's inherited unearned wealth. And he looked at Kendra, the wife who blindly enabled every single malicious act her mother and brother committed. Dion calmly picked up his linen napkin, wiped his mouth, and placed it neatly on the table. He stood up, towering over the room with a quiet, unshakable dignity. No, Dion said, his deep voice carrying absolute, undeniable finality. Barbara gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. Excuse me, how dare you refuse your family in a time of crisis? You are not in a crisis, Barbara, Dion corrected smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket. Your son is facing the direct consequences of his own arrogance. And let us be entirely clear. I know exactly why his accounts are frozen. I know he forged Brianna's signature to bypass a credit check. I know he is actively embezzling from his own clients to buy a mansion for a 23-year-old intern because he is desperate to pretend he is capable of fathering a child. Trent stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the dining table. The remaining color drained from his face as Dion systematically dismantled his lies. How do you know that? Trent whispered, his voice trembling with absolute terror. Because I am not blind and I am not stupid. Dion fired back, his eyes narrowing with disgust. You thought you could hide your stolen cash in my home safe. You thought I would just act as your obedient vault because you married me into your precious toxic bloodline. I took that cash, Trent. I handed it directly to Brianna so she could survive the blizzard you threw her into. Kendra leaped out of her chair, her face contorted with fury. You stole from my brother to help that barren, useless woman. I demand you go to the bank right now and fix this, Dion. If you do not leverage your firm to save Trent, I will divorce you. I swear to God I will take half of everything you built. Dion did not look intimidated. He actually smiled. It was a cold, satisfied smile that sent a shiver through the room. You cannot take half of anything, Kendra, Dion said calmly. My firm was built before we married, and my lawyers secured an ironclad prenuptial agreement that your mother insisted upon because she thought my business would fail. You protected your trust fund from me, and in doing so, you completely insulated my architectural firm from you." Dion turned and walked purposefully out of the dining room. He went straight to the guest closet near the foyer and pulled out a heavy canvas duffel bag he had packed earlier that afternoon. He walked back to the archway of the dining room holding the bag over his shoulder. "I already spoke with my attorneys this morning," Dion announced, tossing his house keys onto the silver tray by the door. "I filed the divorce papers. My legal team will be serving you tomorrow. I am completely severing myself from this sinking ship." Barbara shrieked, demanding he come back, while Trent collapsed into a chair, grabbing his hair in pure panic. Dion ignored them all. He opened the heavy front door, stepping out into the crisp evening air, leaving the Golden Boy and his enablers to face their inevitable catastrophic destruction alone. The sheer scale of Trent's financial collapse was staggering, but what was even more astounding was Lexi's total oblivion to it. While Trent was desperately scrambling to avoid federal prison and frantically calling every former colleague who had already blocked his number, Lexi was entirely consumed with projecting the illusion of infinite wealth. She had secured the country club's grand ballroom for her baby shower, a lavish, aggressively over-the-top event that cost nearly $100,000, all charged to accounts Trent was desperately trying to hide from the incoming Sinclair auditors. Lexi wanted the event to be a coronation. She had invited every high society wife, every wealthy corporate partner's spouse, and every socialite she had spent the last 6 months aggressively networking with. She wanted everyone to see that she had successfully secured the Golden Boy hedge fund manager and his fortune. But her crowning achievement, the ultimate flex she needed to validate her stolen life, was making sure I knew exactly what she had taken from me. That morning, a specialized courier navigated the winding, snow-dusted road leading to my rented cabin. Wyatt was out running errands, so I answered the door myself. The courier handed me a heavy, oversized square envelope sealed with thick gold wax. I did not need to open it to know who it was from. The pretentious calligraphy and the sheer weight of the cardstock practically screamed Lexi. I walked back into the kitchen, dropping the envelope onto the small wooden table. I stared at it, a familiar, sickening dread tightening in my chest. I knew I had power now. I knew Wyatt and I had just dismantled Trent's entire empire. But the psychological scars of 6 years of abuse do not vanish overnight. Lexi's malicious intent radiated from the envelope. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to twist the knife one last time before she moved into the $5 million mansion she thought she was getting. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the gold wax seal. Inside was a thick ivory card with embossed gold lettering. It detailed the time, the location, and the absurdly extravagant theme of the baby shower. But it was the handwritten note included on a smaller card that made my breath catch. "Hope you can make it," Brianna Lexi had scrawled in her loopy, childish handwriting. "I know it might be hard for you to see what a real family looks like, but Trent and I thought you could use a free meal. Wear something nice for once if you can afford it." I dropped the card onto the table as if it burned my fingers. The cruelty was so casual, so completely unnecessary. She had already taken my husband, my house, and my jewelry. She had humiliated me and watched me be thrown out into a blizzard. Why did she still need to kick me? I reached for the envelope and the card, intending to throw them directly into the roaring fireplace. I did not need to subject myself to her toxic manufactured reality. I was pregnant with twins. I was married to a billionaire who treated me like a queen. I had won. I did not need to play her twisted games. Just as my hand closed around the thick cardstock, the cabin door swung open. Wyatt stepped inside, stamping the snow off his boots. He took one look at my face and the gold-foiled invitation clutched in my hand, and his relaxed posture instantly shifted into high alert. He crossed the room in 2 massive strides, his sharp eyes darting from the invitation to my pale face. "What is that?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "It is an invitation," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "To Lexi's baby shower. She sent it here to gloat." Wyatt gently took the invitation from my hand. He read the embossed details and then the handwritten note. I watched his jaw clench, the muscles ticking rapidly beneath his dark beard. He did not yell. He did not throw the card. He simply placed it back onto the wooden table with a terrifyingly calm precision. I was going to throw it in the fire, I said, wrapping my arms around my waist, suddenly feeling very cold despite the blazing hearth. I do not want to see them. I do not want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she hurt me again. Wyatt looked at me, his dark eyes filled with a fierce, uncompromising fire. He reached out and gently cupped my face in his large, calloused hands. "Brianna," he said softly, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that sent a shiver down my spine. "You are not going to hide in this cabin. You are not going to let that arrogant child dictate your emotions. You are going to that baby shower." I pulled back slightly, confusion furrowing my brow. Wyatt, why would I do that? Why would I walk into a room full of people who watched Trent destroy me and did absolutely nothing? "Because they need to see exactly who they are dealing with," Wyatt replied, his eyes gleaming with a ruthless, calculated intent. "They think they broke you. They think they won. It is time we showed them just how wrong they are." He turned and walked toward the bedroom. I stood in the kitchen, completely bewildered, watching as he emerged a moment later, carrying a large, heavy garment bag. The bag was black, branded with the logo of one of the most exclusive high-end fashion houses in Paris. He carried it with a strange reverence, bringing it into the living room and laying it carefully across the leather sofa. "I had this commission the day after Dr. Gallagher confirmed the twins," Wyatt explained, his voice softening as he unzipped the bag. "I knew this day would come. I knew Trent and his toxic family would try to humiliate you one last time before the hammer finally fell. I wanted to make sure you were armed and ready." He pulled the zipper down the entire length of the bag and carefully lifted out the contents. I gasped, my hands flying to my mouth. It was a gown, but calling it a gown felt like a massive understatement. It was a breathtaking custom-made masterpiece of deep midnight blue silk. The fabric caught the light from the fire, shimmering like a starlit sky. The design was incredibly sophisticated, tailored to perfection to highlight, not hide, the beautiful, undeniable swell of a 6-month twin pregnancy. The neckline was elegant, the silhouette powerful, and the sheer quality of the craftsmanship screamed unimaginable, untouchable wealth. "It is beautiful," I whispered, reaching out to touch the soft, cool silk. "Wyatt, I cannot wear this. I will look ridiculous showing up to a baby shower in a couture gown." "You are not just showing up to a baby shower," Brianna, Wyatt said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding register. "You are arriving as my wife. You are arriving as the mother of the Sinclair heirs. You are arriving to claim exactly what is yours." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He flipped it open, revealing a stunning multi-carat diamond necklace that perfectly matched the midnight blue of the gown. The diamonds glittered fiercely, a silent testament to the vast, powerful empire he commanded. "Put it on," Wyatt said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "Put the gown on, Brianna. It is time to give them our first wedding gift." The heavy silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the kind of deafening quiet that only occurs when a room full of high society elites witnesses a carefully constructed hierarchy shatter into pieces. The wives of Chicago's financial titans, women who had spent the last hour gossiping about my downfall, were now staring with undisguised awe at the midnight blue silk draping perfectly over my undeniable twin pregnancy bump. The diamonds at my throat caught the light of the crystal chandeliers, casting brilliant, blinding reflections across the marble floor. Lexi looked like she had seen a ghost. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The smug, victorious smirk had been completely wiped from her face, replaced by a pale, trembling panic. She stared at my stomach, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate confusion. I was the barren ex-wife. I was the broken woman she had replaced. I was supposed to be hiding in a freezing shack crying over the life she had stolen. Instead, I stood before her looking like absolute royalty, radiating health and wealth that completely eclipsed her tacky manufactured winter wonderland. "What is going on over here?" A sharp, irritated voice barked from the back of the crowd. The circle of guests parted hastily as Trent pushed his way to the front. He looked haggard, the stress of his frozen assets and impending federal audit clearly taking a physical toll. His custom suit hung slightly loose and his tie was askew. He marched toward Lexi, intending to scold her for whatever scene she was causing, but then his eyes landed on me. Trent stopped dead in his tracks. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. His gaze darted from the priceless diamonds around my neck down to the prominent swelling curve of my stomach. For a fraction of a second, I saw raw, unfiltered terror in his eyes. He knew his medical secret. He knew he was completely sterile. Seeing me pregnant, visibly and undeniably carrying life, threatened to expose the twisted, sickening lie he had built his entire existence upon. His shock rapidly mutated into aggressive, defensive fury. He could not process the truth, so he defaulted to the only weapon he had left: public humiliation. "You are pregnant," Trent demanded, his voice echoing harshly across the silent ballroom. He let out a loud, mocking laugh that sounded frantic and unhinged. "Whose is it that broke cops? You let some washed-up rural sheriff knock you up just so you could finally play pretend?" The cruelty of his words hung in the air, but the crowd did not join in his laughter. The high society guests were entirely silent, their eyes darting between Trent's erratic behavior and my unshakable, serene composure. "You actually brought a bastard child to my baby shower," Trent sneered, taking a menacing step toward me. "You put on a fake dress and some cheap cubic zirconia to crash a private event and beg for attention. You are absolutely pathetic, Brianna. Security is going to drag you out of here by your hair." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I looked at Trent with a calm, detached pity that only fueled his irrational rage. I let him yell. I let him expose his fragile, desperate ego to every wealthy corporate partner in the room. He was a cornered animal, frantically biting at the air, completely unaware that the trap had already snapped shut around him. "I think the only person making a scene here is you, Trent," I said smoothly, my voice carrying clearly over the soft classical music still playing in the background. Before Trent could unleash another venomous insult, a sudden loud commotion erupted at the grand entrance of the ballroom. The massive towering oak doors did not just open. They were pushed wide by two broad-shouldered men wearing crisp black suits and earpieces. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. Every single head in the room snapped toward the entrance. Wyatt strode into this banquet hall. He was no longer the rugged flannel-wearing man from the snowy cabin. He wore a masterfully tailored jet-black Tom Ford suit that stretched perfectly across his massive, intimidating frame. His dark beard was sharply trimmed, and his eyes swept the room with the cold, absolute authority of a king surveying his domain. He did not look like a former cop. He looked like a man who could buy and sell everyone in the building with a single phone call. He was not alone. Flanking him was an elite, highly coordinated security detail. Right behind the guards walked two medical professionals carrying discreet, specialized equipment bags, a silent, powerful testament to his unwavering commitment to my health and the safety of our unborn twins. The atmosphere in the country club instantly shifted from idle gossip to palpable electric tension. The wealthy guests instinctively stepped back, parting like the Red Sea to create a clear, unobstructed path for Wyatt. The general manager of the Oakmont Country Club, a man known for his extreme snobbery, practically sprinted across the marble floor. He was sweating profusely, his hands trembling as he intercepted Wyatt near the center of the room. The manager stopped and gave a deep, deferential bow, a gesture of respect reserved only for the absolute highest echelon of power. "Mr. Sinclair," the manager said, his voice carrying clearly into the dead silence of the ballroom. "We are profoundly honored to have you here. Your VIP suite has been prepared exactly to your specifications. Can I get you or your medical team anything at all?" The name dropped into the room like a localized earthquake. Sinclair. The wives of the corporate executives gasped, slapping hands over their mouths. The financial partners in the room stiffened, their eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated shock. They all knew exactly who Sinclair was. He was the phantom billionaire, the medical titan, the ruthless acquirer who had just dismantled Trent's hedge fund and frozen billions in assets. Trent froze. His eyes darted wildly from the bowing club manager to the massive tailored billionaire standing in the center of the room. I watched the exact second the cognitive dissonance shattered in Trent's brain. He looked at Wyatt's face, recognizing the rugged features of the man he had mocked in the mediation hallway just days ago. The washed-up broke cop was the billionaire who owned Sinclair Holdings. Wyatt ignored the trembling club manager. His dark, piercing eyes locked directly onto Trent. He moved forward with slow, deliberate, lethal strides until he was standing right beside me. He did not yell. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Wyatt wrapped his large, warm arms securely around my waist, pulling me gently against his side. The heavy diamond necklace resting against my collarbone suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense to everyone watching. It was not cubic zirconia. It was Sinclair wealth. "Step away from my wife." "Trent," Wyatt commanded, his deep baritone rumbling with a chilling, absolute finality. Trent's jaw dropped completely open. He staggered backward, his expensive shoes slipping slightly on the polished marble. He looked at my beautiful silk gown, the blinding diamonds, and the protective, possessive grip the billionaire had on my waist. He realized in that agonizing, crushing moment that the woman he had thrown out into the blizzard had not just survived. She had married the apex predator who now held his entire financial existence, his freedom, and his future in the palm of his hand. The agonizing, crushing moment hung in the grand ballroom like a guillotine waiting to drop. Trent stood entirely paralyzed, staring at the massive, tailored billionaire holding me with fierce, unapologetic devotion. Wyatt did not gloat. He did not issue any dramatic threats. He simply looked down at Trent with a cold, dismissing finality, then turned his back. Wyatt gently guided me toward the private VIP suite, leaving the entire high society crowd to witness Trent's absolute public destruction. The baby shower ended, not with a celebration, but with a brutal, humiliating eviction. As Wyatt and I enjoyed a quiet, elegant lunch upstairs, the country club manager approached Trent and Lexi with a stack of declined credit card receipts. Trent's accounts were completely frozen by the Sinclair acquisition. He could not pay the staggering $100,000 bill for the Winter Wonderland extravaganza. The whispers of the wealthy corporate wives turned into outright mocking laughter as security escorted a screaming, humiliated Lexi and an ashen-faced Trent out the back service doors of the country club. But for Trent, the nightmare was only just beginning. By Monday morning, the luxurious glass-walled headquarters of his former hedge fund had been completely overtaken by Sinclair Holdings. Trent sat locked inside his corner office, the blinds drawn tightly shut. His custom suit was wrinkled, his tie discarded on the floor, and his hands shook violently as he poured himself a third glass of scotch before noon. The polished corridors outside his door were swarming with ruthless forensic auditors. Men and women in sharp suits carrying encrypted tablets were systematically tearing apart every single ledger, portfolio, and hidden account Trent had managed for the last decade. His paranoia was suffocating. Every time a shadow passed by the frosted glass of his office door, his heart hammered fiercely against his ribs. The $5 million mansion he was supposed to close on for Lexi was a ticking time bomb. He had brazenly embezzled that capital directly from his most vulnerable clients, forging my signature to bypass the bridge loan credit check. It was a sloppy, desperate crime committed by a man who believed he was utterly invincible. Now surrounded by Sinclair's elite financial predators, Trent knew it was only a matter of hours before they unearthed the missing millions. Federal prison was no longer a distant, vague threat. It was a rapidly approaching reality. Trent paced the length of his office, his mind racing for a way out, a scapegoat, a loophole, anything to save his fragile, pathetic ego. He pulled out his phone, contemplating calling Lexi to formulate a backup plan, when 3 sharp, authoritative knocks echoed against his locked oak door. Trent flinched, splashing scotch onto his expensive rug. He backed away from the door, his breathing turning rapid and shallow. The auditors had found it. They had found the forged documents. He slowly unlocked the door, his hand trembling on the brass handle. But it was not a forensic auditor standing in the hallway. It was a private high-level courier wearing a completely unmarked uniform. The courier held a heavy sealed black envelope. Personal delivery for Trent. The courier stated, his voice flat and robotic. Highly confidential. Trent snatched the black envelope, slamming and locking the door immediately. He stumbled back to his desk, his paranoid mind spinning wildly. He tore open the thick seal, expecting to find a federal subpoena, an indictment notice, or perhaps a termination letter drafted by Wyatt's legal team. Instead, a single crisp white card fluttered out onto his mahogany desk, followed by a thick stack of medical files printed on heavy premium paper. Trent picked up the card. The handwriting was sharp, precise, and entirely familiar. It was from Dion. You thought you could build your pathetic legacy on a foundation of lies and abuse. Dion had written, the ink pressing deeply into the cardstock. You thought you could treat people like disposable trash to protect your fragile pride. Enjoy the absolute truth. You earned every second of this. Trent threw the card aside, his hands sweating as he reached for the medical files. The glossy logo at the top of the first page made his blood run cold. It was the official crest of the Sinclair Elite Clinic. It was the exact ultra-exclusive facility where Lexi had been flaunting her VIP prenatal care, bragging about the luxurious ultrasound suites and the private concierges. Trent frantically flipped through the pages, assuming Dion had somehow illegally obtained Lexi's prenatal records. He thought maybe Dion was trying to blackmail him over the health of the baby. His eyes darted across the dense medical jargon, scanning for Lexi's name, looking for any anomaly in the pregnancy. But Lexi's name was not on the files. Trent stopped on the third page, his eyes locked onto the patient identification block printed clearly at the top right corner. The name typed in bold, undeniable letters was his own. These were not prenatal records. These were the original, unredacted, highly classified urology and fertility reports from the corrupt specialist Trent had bribed 6 years ago. Dion had managed to secure the raw, unaltered data that Trent had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to bury forever. Trent's hands shook so violently, the papers rattled against the desk. He scanned down to the diagnostic summary, a section highlighted in a bright neon yellow marker that seemed to burn directly into his retinas. He read the clinical assessment detailing a severe surgical complication from a procedure he had undergone at the age of 20. He read the analysis of the irreversible internal scarring. Then he reached the final, irrefutable medical conclusion printed at the bottom of the page. Patient name Trent. Diagnostic status 100% sterile. Probability of natural conception 0. The air vanished from the room. The ambient hum of the city traffic outside his window faded into a deafening, ringing silence. Trent dropped the file onto the desk, his legs giving out completely as he collapsed into his leather executive chair. 100% sterile. The words echoed in his mind, shattering the last remaining pillars of his manufactured reality. For 6 years he had known he was the problem. He had subjected me to endless physical and mental torture, simply to hide this exact diagnosis from his elitist mother and his corporate rivals. He had built a massive, impenetrable wall of lies to protect his ego. But his arrogant, narcissistic brain had been so desperate to maintain that perfect facade that when a 23-year-old intern claimed she was carrying his child, he blindly, eagerly accepted it as truth. He wanted to be a father, a virile patriarch so badly that he completely ignored his own biological reality. Trent stared at the highlighted text, a suffocating, paralyzing horror wrapping tightly around his throat. He had thrown away his devoted wife. He had embezzled $5 million from his own clients. He was currently facing decades in federal prison for massive corporate fraud. And he had destroyed his entire life to buy a mansion for a woman carrying a baby that was biologically, undeniably, completely impossible to be his. The revelation snapped the final remaining threads of Trent's sanity. He let out a guttural, animalistic roar that echoed off the glass walls of his locked office. He grabbed the scattered medical documents from his desk with shaking, clammy hands and shoved them roughly back into the black envelope. He did not care about the forensic auditors swarming the corridors outside his door anymore. He did not care about the hostile takeover, the frozen hedge fund accounts, or the impending federal indictment. A blinding, deafening rage had completely consumed his mind. His entire existence had been reduced to a single violent objective. He needed to confront the woman who had played him for an absolute fool. Trent unlocked his office door and bolted down the hallway. The sharp-suited financial investigators from Sinclair Holdings yelled after him, demanding he remain on the premises for questioning, but Trent ignored them entirely. He shoved past a junior analyst sprinting toward the private executive elevator. He jammed his thumb against the button, his breath tearing through his lungs in ragged, uneven gasps. When the elevator doors opened, he stepped inside and slammed his fist against the button for the parking garage. The drive to the northern suburbs was a dangerous, reckless blur. Trent swerved his luxury sports car aggressively through the midday Chicago traffic, his knuckles turning stark white as he gripped the leather steering wheel. The tires skidded on patches of black ice, but he did not slow down. His mind was a chaotic, burning loop of ultimate humiliation. He had thrown away a devoted wife. He had embezzled millions of dollars from his most loyal clients. He had forged federal financial documents and destroyed his entire professional legacy. He had done all of it to build a perfect, untouchable family with a 23-year-old intern who had played him like a cheap fiddle. Trent violently turned the steering wheel, his car fishtailing as he pulled into the massive wrought iron gates of the newly purchased $5 million estate. The sprawling modern mansion sat on 3 acres of pristine, snow-covered land. It was a monument to his stolen wealth, a physical manifestation of the catastrophic crimes he had committed. He parked the car haphazardly on the heated cobblestone driveway, leaving the engine running and the driver's side door wide open. He stormed up the grand entryway steps and threw open the massive double doors. He did not bother wiping the slush from his expensive leather shoes, leaving a trail of dirty water across the gleaming marble foyer. He marched through the opulent, cavernous house, his furious gaze searching every room. He found Lexi in the custom-built, climate-controlled indoor pool pavilion at the back of the massive estate. The room was aggressively heated, filled with the scent of chlorine and expensive tropical plants. Lexi was lounging comfortably on a plush white chaise lounge near the edge of the turquoise water. She wore a designer silk robe that draped loosely over her swelling stomach. She was sipping a vibrant pink mocktail from a crystal glass, scrolling idly through her phone with a look of absolute pampered boredom on her face. Trent did not hesitate. He stormed across the heated tile floor, the sheer violence of his approach causing Lexi to finally look up from her phone. She let out a sharp, annoyed sigh, completely oblivious to the radioactive danger radiating from his rigid posture. "Trent, what is your problem?" Lexi complained, sitting up slightly and adjusting the lapels of her silk robe. "You are tracking filthy snow all over the imported tile. I just had the cleaning staff polish this floor." Trent reached the chaise lounge and hurled the heavy black envelope directly at her chest. The thick cardstock slapped sharply against her collarbone, scattering the highly classified medical files across the white cushions and onto the wet floor tiles. Lexi let out a high-pitched shriek, dropping her crystal glass. It shattered against the ground, sending the pink mocktail bleeding across the pristine tiles. "Have you lost your mind?" Lexi yelled, her face flushing with indignation. "What is wrong with you?" "Read it!" Trent roared, his voice cracking with a terrifying, unhinged fury. His chest heaved violently as he pointed a shaking finger at the scattered papers. "Read the highlighted section at the bottom of the page, Lexi. Read the medical diagnosis from the exact same elite clinic where you have been bragging about getting your VIP prenatal care." Lexi scowled, brushing the spilled liquid off her robe. She reached down and picked up the paper, her eyes skimming the dense medical jargon. Trent watched her carefully, waiting for the confusion, waiting for the denial, waiting for the frantic tears. But none of that happened. As Lexi read the highlighted text confirming his absolute 100% sterility, the transformation was instantaneous and chilling. The giggling, naive, impressionable intern persona completely vanished. Her posture relaxed. The manufactured panic drained entirely from her face. She dropped the medical file onto the floor and looked up at Trent. Her eyes were completely dead, devoid of any warmth or affection. A slow, cold, deeply calculated smirk spread across her perfectly glossed lips. "Well," Lexi said, her voice dropping the high-pitched, bubbly tone she had always used with him, "I guess the secret is officially out." Trent staggered backward as if he had been physically struck. He stared at her in sheer, unadulterated horror. You knew. He choked out, his hands trembling violently. "You knew the baby was not mine. Who is the father, Lexi? Whose child did I just destroy my entire life to pay for? Lexi examined her freshly manicured nails with a bored, dismissing expression. If you absolutely must know, the baby belongs to my personal trainer, she admitted casually, not showing a single ounce of remorse. He is young, he is incredibly fit, and he is actually capable of giving a woman what she needs. But unfortunately, personal trainers do not make seven figures. They do not manage hedge funds, and they certainly cannot afford to buy me a $5 million mansion in the northern suburbs. You manipulated me, Trent screamed, the veins in his neck bulging as his rage reached an agonizing boiling point. You manipulated yourself! Trent Lexi fired back, standing up from the chaise lounge and crossing her arms over her chest. Do not stand there and act like a victim. You were the easiest mark in the entire financial district. Your ego was so incredibly fragile, so desperate for validation, that you never once questioned my sudden miracle pregnancy. You just wanted a trophy to parade around your country club. You wanted to prove you were a real man to your toxic mother. I just told you exactly what you wanted to hear so I could secure the bag. You handed me your wallet on a silver platter because you are an arrogant, gullible fool. The sheer venomous truth in her words shattered Trent completely. The realization that he had sacrificed his devoted wife and his entire corporate empire for a woman who viewed him as nothing more than an ATM was a fatal blow to his sanity. Get out! Trent roared, stepping toward her with his fists clenched tightly at his sides. I want you out of my house this exact second. Go pack your bags, you parasitic fraud. You are getting nothing from me. I am canceling the credit cards, I am shutting off the power, and I am throwing you out onto the street. Get out of my house. Lexi did not flinch. She did not run away. Instead, she threw her head back and let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed sharply against the glass walls of the pool pavilion. She walked confidently over to her oversized designer purse resting on a nearby table. She reached inside and pulled out a thick legal folder bound with a blue ribbon. Your house, Lexi asked, her voice dripping with venomous amusement. I think you need to check your own brilliant illegal paperwork, Trent. She tossed the folder onto the chaise lounge. Trent stared at it, a cold, suffocating dread crawling up his spine. He knew exactly what was in that folder. Lexi took a step closer, her eyes gleaming with absolute victorious malice. You embezzled $5 million from your clients to buy this estate, she reminded him, her voice a cruel, taunting whisper. But you were terrified that Brianna's aggressive corporate lawyers would find the asset during the divorce mediation. You could not risk putting your name on the deed. You could not risk tying the property to your trust fund. So you legally, irrevocably transferred the embezzled funds directly into my private offshore accounts. You put my name and only my name on the deed to this estate. Trent could not breathe. The walls of the luxurious pool pavilion felt like they were collapsing inward, crushing him beneath the weight of his own catastrophic arrogance. This is not your house, Trent Lexi stated with cold, unyielding finality. I own the deed. I control the remaining cash. You have absolutely no legal claim to this property. If you try to fight me for it, I will gladly hand over the bank transfer records to the federal investigators currently auditing your firm. Now turn around, walk out my front door, and never step foot on my property again. If you are not gone in exactly 2 minutes, I am calling the police and having you arrested for trespassing. Trent stood completely paralyzed, his entire world incinerated into ash. He had mocked Brianna for signing away her assets. He had laughed at her while standing in the mediation hallway. Now the bitter, agonizing truth finally hit him. He had legally handed a $5 million stolen estate to a ruthless opportunist, leaving himself entirely homeless, penniless, and waiting for the federal authorities to arrive. Lexi turned her back on him, picking up her shattered crystal glass from the wet tiles, dismissing him completely from her stolen, luxurious life. Lexi turned her back on him, picking up her shattered crystal glass from the wet tiles, dismissing him completely from her stolen, luxurious life. Trent stumbled backward out of the stifling pool pavilion, his chest heaving, as if he had forgotten how to breathe. He navigated the sprawling, empty corridors of the $5 million mansion he had illegally purchased, the sheer weight of his catastrophic failure crushing him into the imported hardwood floors. When he pushed through the heavy front doors and stepped back out into the freezing Chicago air, the reality of his total annihilation finally settled into his bones. He had no money, no wife, no mistress, no child, and no empire. He climbed into his sports car, gripping the steering wheel with trembling, bloodless hands, knowing that even the vehicle he was driving would soon be seized by federal authorities. Over the next 3 weeks, Trent descended into a suffocating, inescapable hell. The forensic auditors from Sinclair Holdings systematically dismantled every single lie he had ever told. The federal authorities officially moved in, freezing his passports and preparing a massive, inescapable indictment for corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand larceny. Trent was forced to abandon his luxury downtown penthouse and crawl back to his mother's suburban home, a house that was already steeped in its own toxic misery. Dion had followed through on his promise, serving Kendra with ruthless divorce papers and legally protecting his own architectural firm, leaving Barbara and Kendra completely financially stranded as Trent's accounts remained locked in federal purgatory. Trent spent his days pacing Barbara's living room, drinking cheap liquor and watching his legacy evaporate on the financial news networks. He was looking at a minimum of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. His former country club friends treated him like a highly contagious disease. His high-priced defense attorneys demanded a massive cash retainer he could no longer afford. He was completely out of options. But his mother, fueled by a lifetime of arrogant entitlement and blind desperation, refused to accept defeat. Barbara burst into the living room one evening, clutching a glossy society magazine. She slapped the pages onto the coffee table, pointing a shaking finger at a full-page advertisement. It was the Sinclair Health Innovations annual charity gala. This was not just a typical corporate dinner. It was the absolute pinnacle of high society, an ultra-exclusive invite-only gathering of the most powerful billionaires, politicians, and medical titans in the country. More importantly, the advertisement announced that the famously elusive chairman of the Sinclair board would be making a rare public appearance to address the shareholders and unveil a massive new philanthropic initiative. "This is our only chance," Trent Barbara insisted, her eyes wide with a frantic, unhinged hope. "The chairman is the one who authorized the hostile takeover of your hedge fund. He is the one pressing the corporate fraud charges. If we can just get in front of him, if we can explain that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, a minor liquidity gap that you intended to repay, maybe we can beg for a settlement. We can ask for mercy." Trent stared at the magazine, his stomach churning with sickening anxiety. It was a pathetic, desperate plan, but it was literally the only plan they had left to keep him out of a federal prison cell. Getting into the gala required cashing in the absolute last favor they had in the city. Trent contacted a disgraced former junior executive who owed him a debt, a man who currently managed the catering logistics for the event venue. After begging and promising future favors he could never fulfill, Trent secured 2 backstage vendor passes that would allow them to slip past the intense security perimeter and blend into the shadows of the grand ballroom. The night of the gala, Trent and Barbara arrived at the back service entrance of the towering, historic downtown hotel. Trent wore his last clean custom suit, though it hung loosely on his depleted, stressed frame. Barbara wore a recycled evening gown from 3 seasons ago, her face tight with nervous tension. They navigated the bustling service corridors, dodging waiters carrying silver trays of champagne, until they finally slipped through a heavy set of velvet curtains and stepped into the back of the grand ballroom. The sheer, unimaginable opulence of the Sinclair Gala hit Trent like a physical blow. Massive crystal chandeliers bathed the room in golden light. The floral arrangements were towering cascades of white roses and orchids. The room was packed with the absolute elite of the financial and medical world. Trent recognized several billionaires he had spent years trying to court for his hedge fund men, who would not even give him a second glance now. The immense, crushing power of the Sinclair empire was on full display, making Trent realize just how small and insignificant his own stolen wealth truly was. Trent and Barbara hid near a towering marble pillar at the back of the room, their eyes frantically scanning the crowd for anyone who looked like the chairman. Trent clutched his hands together, his palms slick with sweat, mentally rehearsing the pathetic, groveling speech he was about to deliver. He was prepared to drop to his knees. He was prepared to cry. He was prepared to do whatever it took to avoid the cold, brutal reality of a prison cell. Suddenly, the soft, classical music playing throughout the ballroom faded into a gentle silence. The ambient lighting dimmed, and a single brilliant spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the grand, sweeping double staircase at the far end of the hall. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the crystal podium, his voice echoing clearly across the hushed, expectant crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer proclaimed, "it is my profound honor to introduce the chairman of Sinclair Health Innovations and his wife." Trent held his breath, leaning forward from the shadows, desperate to see the face of the man who held his entire life in his hands. The heavy floor-to-ceiling velvet curtains at the top of the grand staircase slowly parted. Trent felt his heart stop entirely. The air was violently sucked from his lungs. His knees locked, refusing to support his weight. Stepping out from behind the curtains, bathed in the blinding spotlight, was the rugged, bearded man from the frozen cabin. Wyatt. He was not wearing a flannel shirt or snow boots. He was dressed in a razor-sharp, bespoke black tuxedo that radiated absolute, terrifying authority. He moved with the effortless, lethal grace of a king claiming his throne. But it was not Wyatt's presence that shattered Trent's mind into a million irreparable pieces. It was the woman holding his arm. Brianna stepped forward, pausing at the top of the marble staircase. She was wearing a breathtaking custom-made gown that sparkled like crushed diamonds, falling perfectly over the beautiful, pronounced curve of her 8-month twin pregnancy. Her skin glowed with undeniable, radiant health. The Sinclair family diamonds rested heavily against her collarbone, and her posture screamed absolute, untouchable power. Trent stood frozen behind the marble pillar, his mouth hanging open in sheer, suffocating horror. The broke cop he had mocked in the mediation hallway was the billionaire chairman who had decimated his company. And the barren, useless woman he had thrown out into a blizzard was now the most powerful woman in the room, carrying the Sinclair heirs. Brianna did not look at the crowd of cheering billionaires. Her piercing, icy gaze swept over the heads of the attendees and locked directly onto Trent, hiding in the shadows. She looked down at him from the top of the grand staircase, her expression completely devoid of mercy, staring at the shattered, desperate man, like he was nothing more than an insignificant insect waiting to be crushed. If you enjoy stories of profound resilience and perfect justice, what other themes of betrayal and triumph would you like to explore next? The applause in the ballroom swelled into a deafening roar as Wyatt gently guided me down the sweeping marble staircase. With every step we took, the reality of my absolute triumph cemented itself in the room. I was no longer the discarded wife shivering in a blizzard. I was the matriarch of the Sinclair Empire. Down in the shadows, Trent completely lost his grip on sanity. The polished, arrogant hedge fund manager who had commanded boardrooms and belittled my existence was entirely gone. In his place was a terrified, cornered animal facing the jaws of a trap he had set himself. As Wyatt and I reached the bottom step, Trent broke away from the marble pillar. He shoved past a group of startled tech billionaires, stumbling blindly into the harsh glow of the spotlight. Security guards immediately lunged forward, their hands reaching inside their tailored jackets, but Wyatt raised a single commanding finger. The guards stopped instantly, forming a tight perimeter but allowing Trent to approach. Wyatt wanted the world to witness this. Trent collapsed heavily onto his knees right at our feet. The expensive fabric of his suit pooled awkwardly on the polished floor. He looked up at me, tears of sheer panic streaming down his flushed, sweating face. His hands shook violently as he clasped them together in a pathetic gesture of prayer. "Brianna, please!" Trent sobbed, his voice cracking and echoing loudly in the sudden shocked silence of the ballroom. "Please, you have to stop this. You have to tell him to give me my company back. I made a mistake. I was out of my mind. I am so sorry for everything I did to you. Please, I am begging you, do not let them send me to prison." The high society crowd gasped collectively. Hundreds of the most powerful corporate executives in the country watched in stunned fascination as a man they once considered a peer groveled on the floor, openly weeping and begging for mercy. I looked down at him, resting one hand protectively over my rounded stomach. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I remembered the cold, clinical way he had tossed those divorce papers into the sink. I remembered the agonizing pelvic cramps in the freezing snow. I looked at his tear-stained face and felt absolutely nothing but cold, pure indifference. Wyatt did not even acknowledge Trent's pathetic display. He simply stepped past the weeping man and approached the crystal podium. He adjusted the microphone, his broad shoulders projecting massive, unshakable authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wyatt began, his deep baritone rolling across the silent, captivated audience. "Thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate the future of Sinclair Health Innovations. We are an institution built on the pillars of integrity, transparency, and the absolute highest standard of medical ethics, which is why we aggressively pursue and eliminate any corruption that dares to touch our network." Wyatt gave a subtle, practiced nod to the audio-visual technicians stationed at the back of the hall. The massive high-definition screens hanging behind the stage instantly shifted. The elegant Sinclair logo vanished, replaced by stark, highly classified financial documents. The crowd murmured in confusion, then gasped in collective horror as the numbers illuminated the room. "The man crying on this floor before you is Trent, former senior partner of a hedge fund we recently acquired," Wyatt declared, his voice echoing with ruthless precision. "As you can see on the screens, a forensic audit has uncovered that Trent systematically embezzled over $5 million from his most vulnerable clients. He siphoned retirement funds and medical trusts to purchase a luxury estate for his 23-year-old mistress." Trent let out a strangled, breathless wail, burying his face in his hands. But Wyatt was not finished. He clicked a button on the podium, and the screens shifted again. This time, the documents were not financial. They were heavily redacted, but unmistakably clear medical records bearing the Sinclair Elite Clinic crest. Trent did not just defraud his investors. Wyatt continued, his tone turning dangerously lethal as he looked out over the crowd. He committed a grotesque, unforgivable act of medical and psychological abuse. Knowing he was 100% biologically sterile from a young age, he bribed a corrupt specialist in our network. He intentionally subjected his devoted wife to 6 years of agonizing invasive fertility treatments, pumping her body full of synthetic hormones, just to shift the blame for his own inadequacy onto her. He tortured the woman he swore to protect simply to preserve his fragile ego. The ballroom erupted in disgusted, horrified gasps. Wealthy women covered their mouths in sheer outrage. Corporate titans shook their heads in absolute disgust. Trent curled into a tighter ball on the floor, weeping hysterically as his reputation, his legacy, and his entire existence were publicly incinerated. From the front row of the crowd, a tall, impeccably dressed man stepped forward into the spotlight. It was Dayon. He wore a sharp, custom suit, looking entirely liberated from the toxic chains of Trent's family. He did not look angry. He looked completely and utterly vindicated. Dion held up a thick, sealed manila folder. He walked calmly toward the stage and handed the folder directly to Wyatt's lead corporate attorney standing nearby. "That is the final authenticated financial audit," Dion announced, his deep voice carrying clearly to Trent, groveling on the floor. "It contains undeniable proof that Trent forged Brianna's signature on the guarantor documents to secure the bridge loan for his stolen mansion. It is over, Trent. Your lies are finished." Suddenly, a frantic, shrill scream pierced the air. Barbara shoved her way through the stunned crowd, her outdated evening gown catching on the shoes of the billionaires she had desperately tried to impress. She saw her golden boy destroyed on the floor, the absolute ruin of her twisted family legacy playing out on the massive screens above. She rushed forward and threw herself onto her knees right next to Trent. But she did not comfort her son. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a frantic, unhinged desperation. She saw the priceless diamonds around my neck and the immense, untouchable power radiating from my stance. "Brianna, my sweet daughter-in-law," Barbara wailed, reaching her shaking hands out toward the hem of my silk gown. "Please, you have to stop this. We are family. You are carrying my beautiful grandchildren. I always knew you were special. I always loved you. Please show us some mercy. We can fix this. We can be a family again." The sheer audacity of her delusion was staggering. This was the same woman who had driven to my freezing cabin just to repossess my car and call me a toxic weed. I looked down at her grasping, desperate hands, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "I don't know you," I stated, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. Barbara gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been shot. Before she could unleash another hysterical plea, the heavy oak doors at the back of the grand ballroom swung violently open. A team of federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with the FBI letters printed boldly in yellow marched into the hall. Wyatt's corporate legal team had tipped them off, feeding them the exact location of the fugitive they were building an indictment against. The crowd parted instantly as the agents strode directly down the center aisle. They reached the base of the staircase, completely ignoring Barbara's terrified screams. Two large agents grabbed Trent by the shoulders, hauling his sobbing, limp body off the polished marble floor. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoing across the silent ballroom was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Trent's Miranda rights were read aloud, the stern voice of the federal agent carrying effortlessly over the hushed whispers of Chicago's elite. Trent dragged his feet, his custom suit pooling around his ankles as he was physically hauled out of the grand doors. He wept uncontrollably, a broken, pathetic man facing decades in a federal penitentiary. The financial titans and socialites who had once clinked champagne glasses with him merely stepped aside, watching his spectacular downfall with cold, calculated indifference. He had played a reckless game of God with my body and his client's money, and the universe had finally collected its debt. The fallout from that night was swift and absolutely merciless. Trent was denied bail. The sheer mountain of evidence Dion and Wyatt's legal team handed to the prosecutors ensured he would never see the outside of a prison cell until he was an old, forgotten man. But the justice did not stop with him. Lexi learned very quickly that stolen money offers no real protection. Less than 48 hours after Trent's arrest, the IRS and federal investigators descended upon the $5 million mansion she thought she had so cleverly secured. Because the property was purchased entirely with funds directly traced to Trent's corporate embezzlement, the federal government seized the estate immediately. Lexi was given a single hour to pack her designer maternity clothes before federal marshals locked the heavy iron doors, leaving her standing on the sidewalk with absolutely nothing. The personal trainer she had claimed was the real father vanished the second he realized she was broke and entangled in a massive federal fraud case. Lexi was forced to move back into a cramped, dilapidated apartment in a terrible neighborhood, raising a child in the exact poverty she had maliciously mocked me for. Barbara and Kendra met an equally satisfying fate. With Trent's assets frozen and seized, the endless river of unearned wealth that funded their toxic lifestyle instantly dried up. Dion finalized his divorce with lethal efficiency. Protected by his ironclad prenuptial agreement, he walked away with his highly successful architectural firm and full custody of his young daughter, citing Kendra's complicity in fraud and her highly unstable living environment. Without Dion's income or Trent's stolen hedge fund money, Barbara and Kendra were evicted from their sprawling suburban home. The two women who had driven to a freezing shack just to call me a toxic weed were forced to sign a lease on a tiny, miserable one-bedroom apartment. Stripped of their country club memberships and high society status, they spent their days trapped in that cramped space, viciously blaming each other for their total annihilation. 2 years later, the bitter memories of that winter felt like they belonged to an entirely different lifetime. The morning sun poured through the massive bay windows of our sweeping estate, casting a warm golden glow across the nursery. I stood near the crib, looking down at two perfectly healthy, beautiful sleeping babies. The pregnancy had been a flawless, closely monitored journey. Surrounded by the absolute best medical team in the world, at the Sinclair Elite Clinic, I had safely delivered our twins, a boy and a girl, without a single complication. They were the absolute light of my life, breathing thriving proof that my body had never been broken. I was no longer just a digital marketing specialist trying to appease a narcissistic husband. I had stepped fully into my power. With Wyatt's immense resources and unwavering support, I had launched a massive, internationally recognized philanthropic division of Sinclair Health Innovations. As the head of the foundation, I directed millions of dollars toward providing elite legal representation and top-tier medical aid to women facing reproductive coercion, medical gaslighting, and domestic abuse. I spent my days ensuring that no woman would ever be manipulated, tortured, or discarded the way I had been. I turned my deepest trauma into an impenetrable shield for thousands of others. I walked out of the nursery and stepped onto the expansive stone balcony that overlooked the rolling green hills of our private estate. The warm summer breeze caught my hair as I leaned against the marble railing, taking in the perfect, peaceful sanctuary we had built. Down on the manicured lawn, Dion was laughing loudly as he threw a baseball back and forth with his daughter. He had remained one of our closest friends and a trusted ally, thriving in his newfound freedom. His architectural firm had partnered with Sinclair Holdings to design state-of-the-art safe housing facilities for the women my foundation rescued. He looked lighter, happier, completely unburdened by the toxic family he had rightfully left behind. I heard the familiar heavy footsteps behind me. Wyatt stepped out onto the balcony, his broad chest radiating that deep, comforting warmth I had fallen in love with in a freezing cabin 2 years ago. He was holding both of our babies, cradling them effortlessly in his strong, muscular arms. He walked up beside me and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to the top of our daughter's head, then leaned down to kiss our son's cheek. The rugged, fearsome billionaire looked at his children with a tenderness and devotion that completely defied words. He wrapped his free arm securely around my waist, pulling me tight against his side. We stood there together in comfortable, absolute silence, watching Dion run across the grass with his little girl. I looked out at the vast, sunlit horizon, feeling the steady, powerful heartbeat of the man who had pulled me from the ice, and the soft breathing of the children I was told I could never have. I looked straight ahead, a profound, unshakable peace settling deep into my bones. He told me I was a barren wasteland. He didn't realize that when he threw me out into the cold, he planted me in the exact soil I needed to conquer the world. Brianna's journey teaches us a profound lesson. Rock bottom can be the exact foundation needed to build your greatest triumph. When she was cruelly discarded in the freezing snow, it felt like the absolute end of her story. Instead, that devastating betrayal became the ultimate catalyst for her to discover her true power and worth. We often view rejection as a reflection of our inadequacy, but sometimes it is simply life forcefully removing toxic elements to make room for genuine love and undeniable success. Have you ever experienced a painful rejection that ultimately led to your greatest victory? Share your story in the comments below.